Hello.
Yep. Your mic's
Hey.
quiet.
Oh, my mic's quiet. Okay,
Actually, that's okay. It's better.
Hey, are you sure? Is everything fine? I'll turn. Right, that's great.
Whoops. Hold on.
Well,
How did he get in here? It's gonna be a vegan debate. Oh God.
yeah, thanks for the invite, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think Steven's screaming and yelling at his audience right now, so
Sorry, hold on. Some
Well,
guy did about digging trenches.
they take their trenches very seriously in that community.
there's a lot of trench digging extravagance going on at the minute, isn't there, with Wagner and Ukraine and all that anyway, so.
True.
So yeah, well, thank you for the conversation. Really quite unexpected. I'm happy to have the opportunity.
So,
How have you been?
originally, real quick, the plan was that we were just gonna have a panel where we were gonna talk about, like, every Tuesday we go over, like, everything that's happened over the last week. A bunch of different content creators jump on. A bunch of people wanted to talk about the whatever podcast debate that Destiny had. So, that was scheduled for 9 o'clock tonight. We I invited Destiny to come on and have the conversation as well, but he wasn't able to make it, wanted to make it earlier. And so this is who all could make it earlier today. It turns out to be a little bit odd when I guess I'm pro-life. He's a freaking vegan. Destiny's very pro-choice and bases that off of consciousness. So I figured we could at least, like, start talking about the consciousness part first, and then maybe just see where it goes from there, because I feel like you two are pro-choice, so I feel like I'm gonna be the odd man out here, so I might
Oh,
just not.
I'm not pro-choice.
Oh,
I'm
you're
not
not
pro-choice at all.
pro-choice.
Oh,
Oh.
no, 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 no. No, if anything, I'm closer to pro-life. But like, I'm a sentientist, so I'm somewhere in between, really. So, yeah, I think we're actually kind of a good mix because we probably represent the entire spectrum in a way, which is characteristic of various viewpoints. So, I mean, obviously, you've got your sort of you two on the far extremes, and then I would call for a severely lessened, like a lower barrier to abortion, or rather lower um, cutoff for abortion. Maybe even as low as 8 weeks, depending on where research goes. But 13 weeks, 11 to 13 weeks.
11 to 13 weeks, damn. Okay, yeah, I'm like end of first trimester. Like, I base it off of being human and being alive. Having a heartbeat and brain function is when we consider you dead. Or if you don't have a heartbeat and brain function, we consider you dead. So I think once you have a heartbeat and brain function, we consider you alive. So as long as you're human and alive, I think that we give you that value. So mine's like, yeah, first trimester, end of first trimester. And then Destiny, what was yours again?
Mine is as soon as I think you have a conscious experience.
And that happens between 18 to 22 weeks, is that?
Between 20 to 28 weeks. So I just say stop at 20 weeks.
Because I think like the main difference is how we're even approaching what consciousness is, and I think that's probably the best way to like to see how this is like how we're categorizing it. I think Destiny, if I'm correct, like I don't. Do you want? Is it better I call you Stephen or Destiny? By the way, I still don't know whether to. Is it
Either
either
one is
or?
fine. Okay,
Either
Steven's
one's
fine.
fine. Okay. So I think Stephen wants to say that it is cortex development, that the sort of right parts of the brain start communicating, and now we have the first emergence of human consciousness. The question is, would you say that it was conscious before that and it wasn't a human like level of consciousness, or is it like, because I think you want to say that it just wasn't conscious and then it becomes conscious, right?
Yeah, it wasn't conscious and then it becomes conscious.
Right. And like to clarify, I think that that's not exactly the best way of approaching it. I think from what we've seen in terms of the evidence that we have, the only reason that we would really attribute cortex development to consciousness is based off a few different sort of presuppositions in the field. that have since been questioned quite radically. Um, One such basically presupposition is that higher functions are necessary for conscious experience, where there seems to be neurological experiments, sort of freak cases that show the alternative, where people have lost large parts of their brain but appear conscious, or they've had their brain severed, in the sense like in the split brain experiments, and there seems to arise two distinct conscious experiences, or possibly two distinct conscious experiences. Um, there's also how we collect and understand brain development in the first place. So the reason that we would even attribute sort of consciousness to the human brain is really based off people saying like, all right, you're conscious, right? Like I'm conscious, and then me attributing consciousness to another, and then going, okay, well, if we just assume that they're conscious and scan their brain, we can now basically affirm that this is the structure necessary for consciousness. Um, and so the reason that we'll kind of say cortex development is because it has the closest sort of in terms of development, it's what we would consider a sort of fully operational brain that we're attributing consciousness to. But that's really just based off sort of reports, which are already based off behavioral analysis. So we've already kind of attributed consciousness to the subject before we then ad hoc it to the brain state, or rather the brain structure in the first place. So I'm just wondering why you say 24 weeks, given that sort of issue, like in terms of actually collecting when a being is conscious.
I have never heard in my entire life another proposal for where consciousness comes from other than the brain. The prefrontal cortex, I guess, of the brain.
I mean, no one's even. I'm assuming, like Tom, do you actually have an issue with consciousness coming from the brain? Or
No.
so let's all assume we all agree that consciousness emanates from a fully functioning brain, whether it's like whether you're someone as far as Castrope, where it's a sort of what's he called it, like a basically detector for consciousness, or a basically a way that consciousness sort of attunes itself and manifests through this metabolized structure, or it's just a straight up physicalist where it's an emergent property, and let's say it's even epiphenomenal, right? It's not even causal. Like either way, we're probably going to affirm it's connected to a brain somehow. The real question is, why are we affirming it's connected to the brain at specifically the point of 20 weeks in cortex development, when behavioral analysis was a prerequisite to the attribution in the first place? So if I've already affirmed that someone is conscious and then said, well, this is what a conscious brain looks like, why can't I just go back to the behavioral analysis rather than strictly base it off this?
Because we could probably imagine a bunch of behavior that would probably be insufficient to establish a conscious experience.
Like what?
Like I could create a robot with some rudimentary functions that could mimic certain types of behavior, but I don't know if we would say that that particular thing is conscious.
Why would we say that it's not conscious though?
Because the faculty needed to process all of the higher order things, all of the abstract emergent things that are happening in a conscious experience aren't there. It's just a couple of rudimentary processes that are moving a thing from point A to point B. Unless for you that's enough to say it's a conscious thing because it can move something.
Well, no, I just think it's enough to say that we could start saying that, like, the more complex something like that becomes, like a predictive engine, it could become something capable of passing a Turing test.
Do you think that all consciousness
Well,
is the
wait,
same?
hold on, wait. Or I don't think a Turing test has anything to do with consciousness. And then just because something is complicated, I don't know if we would say it's conscious. Like we can probably think of a lot of complicated things that aren't conscious. Like a rock rolling down a hill can take a million different potential paths, or like we can think of a lot of things that are complicated or chaotic that aren't conscious, I would imagine, no?
Yeah, I would agree, but I think that we would see that the difference is whether they are emanating not just base reactions, like the way that a plant or a microorganism would, where it's a set response to stimuli, or whether it's
Well, so what is the
behavior.
difference between a set response to stimuli, a behavior, or
Uh,
reaction? Aren't these all
So I would say that I would say that the difference between like a behavior and a mere reaction seems to be the capacity to relate to one's external environment, make problem solve, make a decision, sort of either I would say discriminate in relation to one's environment, recognize one's environment, and then make a response in relation to an end goal based off that what could be a change in the environment. So you would see like
Yeah,
I don't
I don't
know,
get an example. I
yeah.
understand what you're saying, but couldn't all of these things just be complicated chains of reactions, big if-then chain statements?
Yeah, I mean, but I mean that's what a like a Pavlovian or a Skinner would say was a human, right? That it was we are a complex behavioral machine, and that consciousness is epiphenomenal.
Hmm.
Um, which is like, I mean, are you a hard determinist?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I noticed you brought this up last time in the vegan gains debate, in terms of like you said like a dog could just be having a Pavlovian response versus a human having like the semantic understanding, meaning the qualitative response. But if you're a hard determinist, at one, I don't know why that would matter, and two, it seems that it seems to be beyond the point. It doesn't like the whole point of for the Pavlovian isn't to say that these beings aren't conscious. It's just to say that consciousness as a emergent property would be just a essentially a complicated if then what is it, a sort of pattern recognition system responding to value structures that were given to it by nature.
It
Um,
seems difficult to build consciousness out of if-then statements, the experience of consciousness out of just if-then statements. Like, how is my experience right now, my meta reflection of myself, how is that just if-then statements? That seems hard to.
well, I would agree. I mean, I'm not the um, I would say I'm not a Pavlovian or like a Skinner in the first place, but I think that what they're essentially arguing is that through the relation of external stimuli. So if it's like an so for example, like what about would your experience would you say would be too complex for a sophisticated predictive engine? Let's say something far exceeding ChatGPT, right? Let's say like an order of 100 of something like ChatGPT couldn't essentially project um, an environment and then react to it based off reserving memory and like a memory reserve, a memory bank of like previous responses, and then building up the complexity of those responses into a lived experience, which would, I mean, surely you could imagine that you would have everything from a psychological continuity, that you could have a relationship to environment, that you would learn from that relationship to the environment, that your predictions may
I understand
manifest
what you're saying, but
visceral. Yeah.
everything you're doing is a behavioral analysis. I don't think that, like I said, we can create a sufficiently complicated script on a computer to have behavior, but I don't think people would ever feel like a conscious experience arises from the behavior.
I mean, I would agree. I would agree that we would say that we would want to say that language and even behavior itself indicates something other than itself, that is sort of a deeper level, which I think you would call a qualia. I just want to know why you would say that a being which is like I'd rather that why we would even say that all of that wouldn't why the qualia wouldn't come from that anyway. Like it's like for you it seems like this is a very physicalist approach. This is like a very behavioralist form of analysis in which there's no like sort of spirit or sort of
I don't.
anything other
I
than
guess
just.
hold on. To simplify this down, I don't understand. It sounds like you're saying that like, why can't a bunch of behaviors just be called consciousness? That sounds like the simplified version of what you're saying, right?
No, I'm just saying like why can't consciousness emerge from behaviors? Like since we seem to basically
Because
rely
it
upon
just doesn't.
behavior.
It doesn't. That doesn't seem to be possible. I can't imagine that without some immaterial thing. Again, I can create rudimentary behaviors with a script that's 30 lines long, but it seems hard to imagine that there's a conscious experience happening there.
But I don't know what I just think it's sort of like ruling it out in the sense of like we're just saying it's not an intuitive, based on the fact that we are having an experience. But if that experience is essentially just like a behavioral, like I'm not an epiphenomenalist. I just want to point out that even if we did say that dogs are pure Pavlovian, that like will go the absolute like hard materialist Pavlovian way of going about things. I'm just wondering why this is like a dog is just this scripted engine with consciousness, because you said they were conscious, I think. But you just
Mhm.
said they didn't have our kind of consciousness. And then you have our kind of consciousness. And I'm just trying to work out what that difference is, how it relates to the structure of the brain, and also cannot be detected through a form of behavioral analysis. Because really, that's what we'll have to say. Because otherwise,
Wait,
we
what
could
do we
attribute
have to
it.
say this for? Yeah, what are you attributing it for?
Yeah, because otherwise, at 20 weeks, we could say that before 20 weeks, significant behaviors that we could start to attribute consciousness to either a non-human or a human level, in your sort of vernacular. And uh, if it's not the behaviors, then the question is, why are we even attributing it to these structures in the first place? Since our recognition of behaviors is how we recognize consciousness in fully formed adults,
Well, but
which we've then
I don't think we're
used
recognizing
to.
behaviors. I think we're also recognizing like the brain structure like functioning, right? Like for instance, the
Yeah,
behavior of a sleeping person on its face might look similar to the behavior of a dead person. Let's assume we can make the dead person breathe, but we can like hook machines up to a brain and look at like electrical signals and say, oh, it looks like there's activity here, so it's different.
yeah, I would agree. But I mean, like, why do we attribute, like, for example, the whole point is like, why do we attribute those electrical signals in the brain with consciousness or specific experiences? And it's because we'll take someone when they're sleeping and we'll go, right, they're asleep, they're not dead, they might be dreaming or whatever. Um, in the same way, when we look at an animal when it's moving and it's sleeping, and we'll go, oh, it's dreaming. And then we'll put them in an MRI scanner, um, and we'll map out the through magnetic resonance the electrical signals in the brain, and we'll be like, this is the conscious experience of someone they're sleeping. This is how the brain works when someone's sleeping, and there is like dreaming happening here. So it's the same way that we would go, this is a fully conscious individual having an experience of X. Let's scan their brain. Now we have an indication of what's going on in the brain when they're having the experience of X. Like what we're doing prior to scanning their brain is relying upon their reports. And it's kind of an impossible task to get out of, because otherwise, like, look at it like this. We could just assume everyone was a P zombie. Everyone but yourself is a P zombie. A predictive engine which has evolved complex social behaviors in order to survive. They're willing to tell you they're conscious. You scan their brain, you gain the exact same information. Like you just have to trust that. You just have to trust their report. It's because it's basically the hard problem of consciousness.
Okay, I don't. What is the alternative, or what is the point of this line of inquiry? I guess I've never thought to
The
think of like maybe consciousness just arises from simple behaviors or whatever. I don't know what the value is, or I don't even know what the point is of this line of inquiry. Like, what are we trying to establish,
the
or what are we going
point
down?
the point is why we would basically say, in one case, behavioral analysis in relation to two humans going into a neurological experiment is sufficient to say that consciousness exists prior to the experiment beginning, and as a precedent for the experiment to have any clinical, or rather any sort of scientific validity. So, like, basically, you are conscious, let's make an experiment to look at consciousness, and we do that through behavioral analysis. But when it comes to knowing whether a fetus is conscious, we have to rely upon a fully functioning or a fully integrated brain. From like I just don't see why we would use one standard for entering into the form of analysis and then use another standard for the, like a fetus, for example.
Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea. Um, I I I don't understand the line of inquiry. It feels like we're on one end, you're hitting at the idea that like it feels like you're asking me this question. If I see a person in public and they talk like a man, they look like a man, they act like a man, and then you say, isn't it strange that you determine that that person's a man, but at birth you have to see their dick? Isn't that hypocritical? That sounds like what you're saying. Like for a normal person, I'm assuming they're conscious based on a set of behaviors, but I'm assuming that those behaviors are proxying something happening in the brain. If I were to later find out that the underlying brain things didn't exist, I might feel differently about the behaviors, like they're a doppelganger or a robot or something. But just because I'm able to ascertain whether or not I think somebody's having a conscious experience because I'm using behaviors as a proxy for brain activity, I don't think that that necessarily means that all of consciousness is ad hoc to brain activity. And now when I'm analyzing brain activity in the womb, it's somehow some arbitrary thing, and I should be just looking at behaviors. I just don't understand the line of
No,
inquiry. I don't understand
I'm
that.
not saying that brain activity is not entirely arbitrary. What I'm saying is that at the point of like let's say when you're at the street and you look at someone and you ascertain they're conscious, you're like, oh, there's someone walking down the street. You don't think, oh, that's a very complicated like machine that looks like a human. It's a synth or something walking down the street, right?
Hmm.
And I don't think you have any reason to believe that. That's fair enough. Um, but neither did any of the scientists essentially going into the neurological studies when we were attributing consciousness to brain states in the first place. So when we were reducing, like, essentially consciousness to these specific brain states, the whole point was is that they used a form of behavioral analysis, assumed those people were conscious, and created these studies. So
Yeah, sure. But
behavioral
then
analysis is the
afterwards, but I mean,
foundation.
but then afterwards, if we modify the brain, it seems we modify the brain state. We modify the conscious state, right?
Yes, I would agree.
So doesn't that seem that if we were to guess that, like, let's say that we assume that, like, wow, that guy's moving and his veins are throbbing, it must be some organ is pumping blood in his body. Maybe it's the heart. We just assume that without testing it. Then later on, we poke holes in the heart and we find out the blood doesn't pump as fast. Then isn't it
Yes.
fair to say, like, oh, okay, well, that assumption was correct. The blood is probably circulating because of the heart.
Absolutely. In the same way, like if you give someone like a psychedelic drug and they were to report that it has affected their consciousness, like you work out what like chemical formula it is and you see how it affects the brain, then you know that it's going to have like a few different. Then you can work out. You can start basically through clinical trials, like working out what would be like what chemicals might cause a psychedelic effect, like where you can basically say, yeah, actually don't take that acid unless you want to be tripping balls, right? Like yeah, that's fair enough. And that I would 100% agree with that. But the only reason that we would like the whole point is that when we are basing off this, we would basically say based off people's like essentially um behavioral responses in the first place. That's essentially all we have. Like in the sense like even when they report back to us in terms of language that their conscious experience has changed. Like let's say someone was to report back to you. Let's say the what you've gave them acid and they report back to you like nothing has happened. Absolutely nothing has happened. But that behavior is entirely erratic. You're like, no, something has definitely happened. And they affirm to you nothing has happened. Will you believe them or the behavioral analysis?
If wait, will I believe if what if I measure? Wait, say that one more time.
So you give someone a drug,
Yes.
right? They enter into a state like that you believe that's going to be like a hallucinogenic state.
They get high.
They
Yeah.
are, yeah. They take the drug. They say they're absolutely fine. Nothing's changed in their experience. Nothing's happened at all.
Mm-hmm.
But to you, their behaviors look like they're tripping balls. They're basically, or like I don't know, like that they've taken another drug and they're gurning their face off. Like, are you going to believe their behaviors or their report?
Believe it for what? Whether or not they are high. The fact of the matter, if they're
Whether
higher,
yeah, whether their conscious experience has changed or not.
I'd probably believe the behavior
Right? Why?
because the behavior indicates somebody who's high.
So the behavior indicates something about the conscious experience.
Yes.
But okay, so if we accept that the behavior indicates something about the conscious experience, I'm just wondering why it doesn't in the fetus.
Well, hold on. Indicating an altered state of conscious experience is not indicating whether or not something is conscious at all.
No, but it indicates like a causative effect upon consciousness, where we can say that an external stimuli has had an effect upon a being, and their altered behavior shows that a
Sure,
conscious
but the
experience
causative
has changed.
effect has to do with the drug that is interacting with a part of the brain, right? And I'm looking at a
Yeah,
fetus, I would be looking at that exact same part of the brain developing. No?
and but I just don't understand. Like look at it like this: the whole point of you saying that the part of the brain is the part that has consciousness is because we first had these reports, and we've basically indicated, okay,
Wait,
people who
hold on. When
have
you say
consciousness.
reports, we're talking about different things here. Somebody's self-reporting whether or not they're high is not relying on a self-report that somebody's conscious, right?
I mean, it's the same thing. It's in terms of behavioral analysis or reporting. It does not matter. It
I
really
don't
does
think
not.
we
And
require like somebody reporting to themselves saying, yes, I am conscious. I don't think we rely on that. No.
in terms of a neurological experiment, we absolutely do. Like, it would be saying, what kind of conscious experience are you having?
Or
Like,
what
how do
kind
you
of
feel?
neurological experience are you? I'm pretty sure that most of these are going to be measured with just. Is it an EEG that you stick the electrodes on the head? I don't think we rely on the person to self-report their.
You can't measure a phenomenal experience with an EEG though, mate. Like, if I was to ask you, like what is the experience of red like? You can't give, like, and she just show someone an
Oh, sure, I
experience.
understand that. Yeah, I guess I'm just not sure what kind of neurological experiments you're talking about. I guess.
I guess the point I'm saying is that, like, I'm assuming that this whole thing relies upon having a qualitative experience of a certain kind, which seems to be indicated to us through behavioral analysis, which is why we construct certain examinations of the brain in the first place, which is why you attribute certain parts of the brain and certain qualities to parts of the brain in the first place. But then when it gets down to that behavior analysis, like prior to a certain point of fetal development, you start saying that the behavior is simply reactive or like non, like, even when it's not a pure reaction in the same way like a knee-jerk reaction, you'd still say that that behavior doesn't indicate the
Sure.
at
Well,
least
how about okay?
the
Rather than the Socratic Inquisition, why not just tell me what
sorry.
is your because yeah, I see zero value in any of this inquiry. So I'm curious, what is your like final point, or what do you want to wind up at for this?
Well, I guess I just want to know why, like, well, one, I think there's a point of why you were attributing a conscientious a difference in consciousness to an animal and a human, to the point in which it is like one is of such a radical different kind, like a radically different
Sure.
kind.
The behaviors and the
Um,
cognitive processes of humans seem to be of another kind, substantially different. The
right,
metacognitive processes of humans seem to be of a substantially different kind versus like a dog or a cat. Like the
right,
ability to
okay,
reflect on oneself, the ability to employ language that's a proxy for sophisticated concepts in the mind of time and space and everything, like seem to be unique to humans versus animals.
right, and you're saying that none of that, and specifically none of that is there, like the specific human consciousness is there prior to 20 weeks. Even so, like, the difference between animals and humans is analyzed through behavioral proxies, which give an indication of what we would probably call like phenomenal or existential differences between it, like, subjects. So like a human is having like an experience of like existential dread, where a dog is sort of maybe feels a bit anxious, and you'd say that they are two different kinds of things.
Sure, yeah.
Right. Okay. And the reason that one is valuable and one isn't is why.
Um, where I have no idea. One is human, one isn't. I don't know where value ultimately comes from. I don't know.
Right. So, but I'm just wondering, like, if we're just saying like one is human and one isn't, right? Why would it matter if, like, let's say the dog did have existential dread? Why would it matter to you?
I don't know, because there's probably going to end up being some metacognitive process that allows us to. I don't know. I have to think about it a lot. I'm not sure. They don't, so I don't think about it.
That's the thing. It's just because it seems like, really, it's kind of like when Trent basically pulled you up and he said, "Look, I think that the human side of things is basically so you don't have to give consideration of animals, and I think the consciousness side of things is so you don't have to give a consideration of zygotes and fetuses before a certain point of development."
Right.
And all of this seems to be essentially arbitrary, because I mean, like, let's be honest, you are a subjectivist, right? So, and it's coming from like your descriptions of your behaviors. So, like, why, rather than look towards all of this sort of externality, why don't you just even just say, like, inwardly, I just feel different? Because that's what it boils down to, right?
Sure. I mean, ultimately, I think it's kind of where we're all at, but sure.
Yeah, I mean, let's say you're right, and let's say we're all at. Then why the, like, in the abortion debate, why do we have to relate it to the point in which there is, like, why couldn't you be saying yes, it's conscious, but it's not having a certain kind of consciousness? And then why would you not be okay, like, in theory, right? Because let's be honest, right? Like, in theory, I think if I was to show you like conclusively that humans up to the age of 3 do not have the kind of consciousness you're talking about, which probably isn't true, but let's just say it is,
Hmm.
you would still not give a fuck. You still probably would not be okay with killing a 3-year-old. Like,
I mean, theoretically, probably right. That's the singer position, right?
yeah, basically, yeah, it's Singer's position.
Hmm.
Yeah, well, I think he's old one. I don't think he's new one. Like, let's say you probably wouldn't be okay with that, regardless, right? So the
Well, I
whole
don't know. Why
point is
not? I mean, it's not going to truly prove that babies are just like fucking black boxes of like input, output, stimulus, behavior, or whatever, and they're not having any kind of experience at all. I mean, obviously, from a political or optics point of view, it would look different. But I mean, like, I guess it'd be at that point the same as terminating a fetus, sure.
right. So you actually do see, right? That's the thing, because it seemed to me like it might just be that you feel differently about these things, not that you actually are considering this kind of conscious, like, is this kind of conscious experience having like an emotional impact on you where you go, hey, wait a minute, that's too much like me, I'm having an empathetic response.
Well, I mean, fundamentally, I would imagine respect for humans or any other life is coming from some sort of empathetic response to protect something that's like me or something that's having an experience like me. Carnivore
Okay.
extends that to humans. Vegan extends that to all sentient things, right?
Yeah, I think about I mean, I would say that you could have it off pure reason, right? Like you can. Like I think that there's arguments to be had, but I think for the sake of what, or rather than getting into the meta ethics of it, because I'll just be an absolute mess. I just really want to know where you're attributing value and what is essentially marking that distinction. Because like likewise, if we invert that, then if I could argue, like for example, that there is no reason to attribute a basic um like input output experience to dogs, cats, dolphins, chimpanzees, whatever, and instead we have just as much reason to believe that they have belief states, pattern recognition, like or recognition of behaviors. They're capable of discerning aspects of their environment and changing their behaviors in the same way that human infants would. I'm just wondering, what would that still carry over? Would you still go, oh, wait a minute, okay, that level of sophisticated consciousness now in an animal would mean that I would be vegan.
Potentially, sure.
Right, okay. So let's just talk about, well, why would you say that the dog, cat, chicken, pig, whatever, specifically, uh, doesn't have this level of consciousness?
They don't exceed, or they don't seem to have any of the proxies that I would use to measure for it. Like unable to employ language. They don't seem to be self-reflective. Like there's just no way for me to see that type of conscious experience that they're having.
So you're saying, like, in terms of the consciousness experience they're having, there's no way for you to perceive it, right? How would you perceive the conscious experience of an adult or a human, like an adult human?
Um, well, I mean, I would assume if we have all the same brain structures, that their experience is probably identical to mine.
Right. I mean, one, why, and then two,
Well, why is
um,
because I would imagine the same emergent thing would come from the same underlying structures.
but I mean, like, why would you even it's kind of like question begging, right? It's like this kind of brain is what produces consciousness, and only this kind of brain. Like it's like, and then if I ask why, you go, because this kind of brain produces consciousness, and you go, why? Because I assume that it does.
Well, I'm a big question beggar.
You can see why I would have. I'm just saying, like, it just seems that like you are doing what Trent said. I think Trent really did get you right, to be honest. It's just
Okay,
that you are
maybe you
saying
did.
that there is,
Possibly. Yes, true. I agree.
well, I don't know what
I
to
mean,
say, man.
this is literally why I say that we just value humans, because I don't think that we can explain why we value human consciousness or anything else like that, except for that it's just human and we're social animals, so we value other humans. At least the ones around us. We don't value all humans, but the ones that we do
What do you
value,
mean
we
by
want
that,
everybody
Tom?
else to value them. Huh?
What kind of humans don't you value, Tom?
I don't value any of the ones that I don't know. But I value my family and my friends, and I want everybody else to value them and the government to value them and give them rights so that they can continue to exist. I'm a little confused though, perspective philosophy. You're saying that you're not an epiphenomenalist, but it sounds like you're making an epiphenomenal argument where it's like intelligence, consciousness, memory determined by qualia. But if that's not what you believe, what do you believe then?
I'm actually a Catholic.
So
um,
you believe in a
so
soul?
I believe in a soul. Yeah, I mean, I'm an Aristotelian, so I'd say that the unifying principle of a human being, or sentient being, a sentient creature, is they're having a psyche. So, like, your psychological experience is part of what it means to essentially have a unified experience of your environment. Like for example, I don't see a reason to distinguish between a human consciousness and an animal consciousness in terms of basic awareness, like qualia, like Destiny said. I don't see a reason why we would do that. We might have different ways of engaging with the environment, like Thomas Nagel's point. Like, I don't know what it's like to be a bat, but that doesn't mean that I don't think that the bat doesn't have a conscious experience that's analogous to the conscious experience of a dolphin, a chicken, a pig, a human. It's just a different kind of the same thing, mediated through different sort of senses and different like organs, which essentially give it different information about the same thing. It's aware of information. That's basically what consciousness is.
Why? How do you get around being Catholic and God making animals taste good?
Because he also allows us to be tempted and tells us that we shouldn't be bad boys.
So every single animal in the animal kingdom that God's created eats other animals except for humans?
Yeah, I mean, we're the only ones, like, the whole point of the Christian narrative is to say that there is a big distinction between animals and humans, and that's rational.
Yeah, but why do
That's like,
animals line up like in such a perfectly healthy way with like the human diet?
how do that? Like, they definitely do not. What do you mean?
They absolutely do. The nutritional profiles you get from consuming meat is like vastly superior to you have to do like a pretty complicated dance of vegan diets and supplementation and shit to get the same type of nutrition that you would from just eating
Not
meat.
really. Like, not really. Like, I think, like, in terms of a vegan diet, the only things that you'd have to supplement in the contemporary era really is B12 and vitamin D. Vitamin D you'd normally get from the sun. B12, the sources of B12 are dependent upon like how we think that we might have got them from water supplies, dirt, essentially like the way in which you get B12 is like a microorganism in the first place. It just so happens to essentially collect in the gut of a ruminant. So it's not like, and even then, like when you're looking at where we would be getting our sources of B12 prior to this, like I don't think it's fair to say that a vegan diet couldn't be just as healthy. And also, we don't seem to have the like. Look at it, man. Like,
Vegan diets can be as healthy, but it's substantially more complicated to try to like get the same sorts of like, for instance, essential amino acids. You've got to mix a ton of different types of food to match that, or like you just said, B12 supplementation.
you could just
Like
eat
there,
walnuts.
you can't just eat walnuts. When do you just eat walnuts?
Sorry, and omega threes and sixes. Sorry, not amino acids. Amino
Yeah.
acids isn't hard at all. Actually, I mean, like amino acid profiles, you can eat like I'm not one for whole protein kind of bollocks anyway, because I think it's basically a myth. But even if you did, you can eat beans and rice will give you a 1.1 amino acid profile, so it exceeds beef. So
That's
like, like
absolutely not true. But
black beans and brown rice will exceed beef in terms of amino acid distribution.
why was Jesus feeding people with fish if you're not supposed to eat them?
Um, I think one, there is the ethics of 2,000 years ago, and I think Jesus now would be vegan. And two, I would say that there is um, there's loads of stuff. I mean, there's like depending on how you understand what was going on in the Bible. But like Jesus never said anything about slavery. Yet most Christians would say slavery was wrong, wouldn't we? Because the ethics that he teaches indicates that this behavior was wrong.
Well,
Whether
hold
it
on.
was right
Firstly, weren't there
2,000 years
literally?
ago.
I'm pretty sure, like in Deuteronomy and stuff, there are guidelines to owning slaves, are there not? So the Bible does
Yeah, I
mention it.
mean
I
there
don't
is.
believe the Bible mentions anything ever at all about veganism, does it?
Well, there's the covenant. There's the God's covenant with the animals. There's our stewardship.
You gotta have
Um.
kosher food.
Yeah, and like the
And
fact that
also,
all
when Jesus
plants
fed
are
people
halal
with fish, why
Eden.
wouldn't he just create black beans and rice? Like the fish weren't. He started with 4 fish and he ended with 1,000 or whatever, right? Why
Someone
wouldn't he just
handed it.
create?
One thing is that someone handed him the fish. Like it's not like.
Sure,
But
but why
even if
not turn
Jesus
it
went and
into?
caught the fish, even if Jesus went and caught the fish, there is two things to be said, right? One, he's God, right? The whole point. Like I hate to evoke divine command theory, but if God comes down and manifests nature, right? Nature and the whole point for Christians is to be the for the good of God. So the fact that like Jesus has made nature for himself and for the well for like for the good of God, right? For the good of the Trinity, if you could say, it means that like essentially like if it was for the good in that situation, it was for the good. Like if it was what God wanted, it is the good. Like tautologically for Christians. Like even if like for example, like I can command someone to go and murder their son, it will be wrong. If God commands someone to go and murder their son, that is a story we teach our children. Like, it's not the same thing.
Okay, I feel like I don't know how. Yeah, I guess. I mean, if you're religious, you're already doing like tremendous leaps of faith, I guess, to make that worldview work. But the fact that
I don't
then
think so.
you would take, well, I mean, you are. But then the fact that you would take like the fact that the Bible has zero mention whatsoever of any sort of vegetarian, vegan, anything, and you're trying to read through this that you can still be a vegan or vegetarian while being Catholic, is
What are you talking
why?
about? The Catholic Catechism says that we should not cause needless suffering to animals, and that we should needless suffering or death to animals, and that the use of animals is basically tied to the human good. And the human good, like let's look at even scripture on this. Noah's being given animals to eat in the first place was the human need because the world had been flooded. There wasn't anything else to eat. And even how you interpret that, it might be even more limited, that only certain things like eggs and stuff were actually meant to be consumed at that point. But it depends upon translation. So the way in which scripture works in towards animals, like animals have been made with a manifest end goal, which we could see through a consideration of natural law. They have a telos, and God said that is good, and he gave us the role to consider that good in our day-to-day lives. So like, don't pollute rivers, don't fucking destroy the rainforest and the ocean and that. It's only the only reason that we're in this situation is because essentially like the Protestant reformers, um many like interpret it very harshly in the first place with the cultural mandate, but it sort of got polluted over time. It got like diluted over time, where like it's just do what the fuck you want in
Why would
nature
the
for
Pope
human
not
good.
just come out and make a statement on this, and then clear
Well,
it
I
all
mean,
up?
like I don't think I'm not saying that I'm the standard doctrine in terms of Catholicism. I'd say I'm heterodoxical. I'm not the norm. I don't think the average Catholic is going to affirm
Hold on, wait. I
veganism,
might
but
be a
I think,
total idiot. Can you be a heterodox Catholic?
yeah,
What does that mean? So, like, do you
it
not
just
believe
means
that when
that
the
like,
Pope is making statements on matters of biblical scholarship or matters of like divine command or whatever, that the Pope is not infallible? Or
well, it's not to say that the like one, there's how we understand the infallibility of the Pope, but also there's basically what makes you a Catholic is your affirmation is like four pillars of Catholicism. There's like the creed, there's the Our Father, there's the I'm trying to remember them off the top of my head now. There's the creed, there's the Our Father, Prophet Catholic. Oh shit, that's just like totally evading us. Creed, the Our Father.
faith,
There's
sacraments, life in Christ, and prayer.
yeah, sacraments, and yeah, basically. And as long as you affirm all of those in the same way, that would be like, for example, you affirm like the Catholic Trinity, the Apostolic Creed, you affirm, the sacraments, and you affirm these sort of basic structures, then you're a Catholic. And then there's a wide variety. There's huge amounts of debate within the Catholic Church. I mean, it's a huge, huge religion. There was remember like there's the scholastics were like some of the largest like debate like bros in the fucking world ever. Like there's like whole manuals on how to debate. So like we can't have our own ideas.
So you do believe in like evolution, though, right?
Yeah, 100% believe in evolution. Yeah, I'm not a
So
fucking
do
idiot.
you
Yeah.
do you deny that like our
Wait,
bodies
what
are
is it?
like
Hold on,
made
wait.
to eat meat throughout
Yeah, wait, what is this?
evolution?
Genesis 9:3. Okay, I'm just reading Bible verses now. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as the green herb have I given you all things. Every moving thing, yeah.
That's the story of Noah, which I brought up before, which was essentially contextual to the specific point in which he was
Why would he give
given.
him animals to eat if that's unethical? Can't God just make more vegetables?
God, like I think, like when we're talking about, you could basically see this with the problem of evil in general. Like, why doesn't God just solve all of the fucking problems in the world? Like, there are certain things which are morally acceptable in certain circumstances, which God has outlined, and then there are things which are not. And remember,
Hold on,
like, I'm a Catholic.
real
I
quick on
think this
that.
is
Is there any other example where God has like put forth, just like told somebody to go commit sin?
well, yeah. I mean, he said, like, for example, we would normally outline that you shouldn't go to war. God has commanded war.
Wait,
Normally,
but
you would.
aren't those wars righteously justified? Are you talking about like the Israelites and shit, or where like
Yeah,
which?
but in the same way that the killing of animals, right, in this situation is righteously justified.
Well, how is
That's
it justified when
basically.
God could just provide you with vegetables? Like that's different
Well,
in
why is
war.
it
You have
justified when God could have just not made those people? Like, what are you talking about? Like,
because my understanding is that sin on the planet comes from humans turning their back on God, essentially. That you ate the apple, you got the knowledge, and now humans make choices on the planet where they turn their back from God, and that's where the sin cometh from. But that's different than God just giving you something and saying, go sin. There's a difference between like one man raping a woman and God giving you a Playboy magazine. If God gives
yeah,
you a
but
Playboy, and I would say, well, why would God give you a Playboy? Isn't masturbation sinful? And then for you to say, well, don't men rape women? Like that's sinful too, right? Well, that's different. In one, you've got two humans making poor decisions, which is where evil comes from. But then in the other, the source of the evil is God itself. That doesn't make any sense to me as from a Catholic point of view.
But I'm not saying that. I'm saying that in one instance it's a sin, in one instance it's not, and that's based on contexts which God has outlined, which is
But
essentially
you haven't
one was
given
a
me
point of need.
you haven't given me the context of why God
Well,
wouldn't just give him corn.
well, it's like the same reason why God just doesn't intervene divinely and give the Jews Israel. Like
Wait, no,
the
no,
like
no, 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 no.
what
Hold on. You're playing a trick here. I don't know where you're doing this. I'm not giving you a circumstance where God has to intervene against other humans. There's just a one-on-one relationship between God and Moses. Why wouldn't God give Moses corn? I'm not talking about like why God wouldn't stop some other humans or help in a war or do human versus human conflict. This is just a one-on-one between God and Moses. Why wouldn't he just give him corn?
But what I don't understand is if we're talking about essentially what is a supernatural intervention, right? Like God can intervene and do whatever the fuck he wants, right? That's the whole point, right?
Yeah.
He can manifest nature in any way, shape, or form that as to conform with his will. Then the whole point is that there must be a reason he's not intervening here. Now, I'm saying that he's not intervening for the same reason, which is human free will, essentially
Hold on, no, no,
that
no, wait.
supernatural.
You're obfuscating so much. No, this isn't about human free will or intervention. God could have given Moses corn, right? Why would he just not give Moses corn? This isn't about like Moses surviving in the wilderness or whatever. This is just things that God could give Moses. Why couldn't he just give him a ton of vegetables?
One, like I think like I hope you understand that one. I don't think this is literal. Like I'm not a fundamentalist. I don't think the Bible is literal. I think this is allegory.
Okay, well, hold on.
Pretty,
If it's allegorical, that hurts your argument even more because in an
how?
allegory, would it not make more sense for God to give him vegetables to show the goodness in eating from the lands and having a kind dominion over animals? God provided Moses with
No,
two of every animal so that mankind got a peaceful dominion over animal and then gave him vegetable to eat from?
not at all. Because if you look at the structure of the story, Eden is essentially a bloodlust domain in which animals only ate from tree. Sorry, humans only ate from trees. And then after that, sin enters the world. God has to divinely intervene in order to crush out sin, and humans are left on a boat with only animals to eat, and can eat animals only in that circumstance. So what it shows is essentially humans have a responsibility to themselves that doesn't apply to animals, but humans also have a responsibility to animals in general. So it's not like you can eat animals in general, I don't care. It's that in this select circumstance, you can eat animals, which shows that human morals are constrained to specific circumstances which are being outlined in the scripture.
Okay, I feel like we're okay. This seems really goofy, but all right.
I
That's fine. Like I'm happy to. I
Like,
mean,
I mean,
look at
it
it like
reminds
this.
me of
Like
like it
this
reminds me
isn't.
of like when people make the argument that like the United States is expressly and specifically like a Christian nation, and despite the fact that like our founding fathers were all like the main the main character and wrote a ton and so much, and we've got the Declaration, we got articles, we've got the Constitution, we've got so many things. For some reason, all of them were too stupid to ever write at any specific point. The U.S. is a Christian nation. They never wrote it. I don't know why they wouldn't write that. And I feel similar with the Bible. We've got the whole Bible. We've got all these councils and Nicaea, all these different books and everything. At no point, why doesn't somebody just write, and thou shalt not eat meat? Like, why can't that be Commandment 11 or whatever? Like, it just seems like it would be
It's the
such an
same reason
obviously
there's
important
not
thing.
the same reason why it took a while forward to affirm that slavery was wrong. Look, like the way that the way in which the Christian faith develops is that it develops. Like the living tradition moves alongside it, and as we become more rational and we understand what is right and wrong more clearly, we develop in light with with the light of reason. Like it's like, would you rather would be a dumb bunch of monkeys who rely upon only what people said previously?
Hmm. I mean, the books of the Bible are the books of the Bible. There might be some I mean, we might reinterpret to make it fit our modern day life, but not eating animals is a pretty big thing. If that was supposed to be like in the original
So's not
patch
having
notes.
slaves. So's not having slaves, yet it wasn't like written, don't have slaves.
I feel like slavery was something that was explicitly allowed in the Old Testament. Were there guidelines for treating slaves? Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, but
It's been
one
a
of the
long
biggest
time, but
points is to say that like slavery would be wrong according to most Christians now against Christianity. Like in terms of how we understand Christianity, we'd say that Christian ethics forbids having slaves.
okay.
And you know, in relation to the America being Christian, kind of. I mean, there was like America, like the whole point is that the founding fathers were liberals, right? Let's be frank. Well, mostly liberals, but they were liberal Christians. They believed that you had to come to Christ through your own reason, and so relied upon the reasoning of everyone. So they couldn't command someone be a Christian for one. The liberal doctrine that they affirmed does rely upon a creator God. You know, we what is it that we take these rights to be self-evident, you know, as given by a creator God. So it's not like as if like your country wasn't essentially the product of a Christian form of development. It was just that it that they were rational enough to see that a Christian nationalism is an oxymoron. That it's like you're forcing someone to try and accept God into their hearts, Christ in their hearts, which is actually unchristian. So I would say that, like, you know, your nation was and is a Christian nation in custom, in constitution, but not in terms of command. I think that would be fucking moronic. But
Gotcha.
yeah,
So,
but I mean, yeah.
I mean, I wanted to kind of take this back because Destiny, I assume you don't actually think that you are begging the question and that you do still have a reason for why you would value human consciousness, right?
Yeah, I think human conscious of a kind, but I mean, like, it's at some point, if we go fundamental enough, it's going to be question begging, probably, right? But I mean, I would argue that all things are at some fundamental level.
So,
Oh,
wouldn't
sorry.
that mean that you are just valuing humans then, though? Like, if that's the case, like that we do just happen to value humans because they're
Sure,
human?
but if we get down to some really fundamental level, like why do you value humans? Why do you value why do you value happiness over suffering? Why do you value long life over short life? Why do you value fulfillment over like? I mean, at some point, it's going to get incredibly arbitrary. Like I'm not going to have a good reason for any of this. It's just going to be almost like axiomatic, and I'm just going to appeal to like I guess the common
I,
feelings of like every other human, basically.
like one, to say it's axiomatic implies a rationality that's not present, right? Like you're saying that's self-evident, right? Or that it's or that it's rational to be presumed. But really, you're saying it's arbitrary, right? You're just saying that it comes from your passions. Like that's all you're saying. Like it's emotional.
Sure.
You just feel a certain way. But I
Well,
just don't
yeah,
see
or
why
it
you'd
comes
even
from
go
the
into these
brain, yeah.
debates, man. Why are you even going into these debates telling the people how you feel? Like I feel this way about abortion. Why? Because I like to think of consciousness in this way. Why do you think of it this way? Because I feel this emotion about it. That's all. That's all it is. It's prescriptivism. I feel this way. I wish you would too.
Sure, but
Um,
at the end of the day, I think that like the goal is to probably find like what is the most consistent set of guidelines by which you live your life, and I don't agree that people that take a pro-life position would adhere to a consistent set of guidelines. I think the set of guidelines that I lay out would be more consistent if they were followed through and through, whereas on his, I think that there were like the bullets that I had to bite from my worldview were if babies could be born without brains, but you could later give them a drug that would give them brains, could you rape the baby until it got the drug that grew its brain? That was like the type of hypothetical that I had to bite the bullet on, which I'm fine with. The hypothetical that he had to bite bullets on, where every single miscarriage has to be investigated as a potential homicide, 64 cell clumps need to be kept alive indefinitely in petri dishes. Plan B, like, would have to be anytime you take a Plan B, that has to there has to be an accompanying murder investigation. It has to be. Oh, it was illegal for all forms of suicide. People in persistent vegetative states need to be kept alive for decades. If somebody has permanent brain damage that keeps them from ever waking up at 20 years old, they've got to be kept alive for 50, 60 years. Yeah, I think that I feel like the system of prescriptions that I'm making, we're going to be a lot more consistent than the system of prescriptions that he
I
would
think
have.
you've
That would have
totally
been completely all over the
misrepresented
place.
Trent. I think you've totally misrepresented Trent there because I think Trent was fair enough to say that he would value like all forms of human life, but in terms of investigating every instance of a miscarriage, it's fine for, he even indicated that it depends upon things like resource distribution, reasonable,
No, that's all.
what would
These
be
are cop outs.
reasonable suspicion,
Yeah.
reasonable
These are all cop
suspicion,
outs. These are all
like,
cop outs. These are all
how is
cop
that a
outs.
cop out? Like, in the
Because
same way,
everything you're
like,
saying applies to every single homicide investigation,
yes,
obviously.
it does. Yes, it
But
does.
but
And
giving
in
but
this
giving these
case,
types of qualifiers is because he's trying to cop out from the obvious optics of it looking really bad. That if a woman has a miscarriage at 3 weeks, which is obviously like a traumatic and unfortunate thing, that there probably needs to
Mhm.
be some light investigation accompanying that to make sure that she wasn't conducting herself in a way that was causing the miscarriage.
Yeah, but
But
I
in
don't think you'd
Trent's
have a
world,
like. I think if should. I think you'd be fine to say if she rocked up drunk or like on cocaine or something, right? And you
Mhm.
had visible reasons to believe, like you had a reasonable suspicion, then an investigation would take place. But what he was saying is that essentially, um, that in this situation, that it's not reasonable to investigate every single miscarriage because we don't have reason to believe that these women are not just miscarrying because it is a dangerous time for developing humans, right?
Sure, and there's a thing called SID, sudden infant death syndrome, right? Sometimes for reasons that I don't think we've figured out yet, sometimes babies just die. It's incredibly tragic and it happens,
It
but I'm
is,
pretty
yeah, it is.
sure you would say that all of those are probably worth some light investigation as well, correct? Or do you think somebody
Well,
could just bring a dead baby to a hospital and say, "Oop, SIDS, sorry,
I'm
I mean, I
LOL."
think
pretty
they
sure.
probably are either way, though, because you would want some sort of like medical reasoning for why you had the miscarriage. And so just getting the medical reasoning in and of itself is going to decide whether or not there should be a legal investigation as well,
Well,
right?
I mean, it
Yeah.
depends. Some people miscarry early on. They're not going to the hospital to get like super medical reasons. Unfortunately, I think the majority of miscarriages are due to weird genetic abnormalities that just happen early on during gestation.
Let's be frank as well. Miscarriage is way more common than SIDS.
Yes, it is.
Miscarriage
Yeah.
is, yeah.
Which is
So
also a
like
huge
reasonable
problem because it's
suspicion.
basically like billions of babies are dying, like, or maybe not
Yeah, I
billions,
mean,
but like tens
yeah, I
of
mean,
millions of
like in
babies
some
are
respects,
dying.
you could say it's a huge problem. Like a criminal's can more easily cover their tracks. Fair enough, but it also means that it would be more of an impeachment upon an individual's rights to perform unnecessary, um, like uh, like essentially to infringe upon their bodily autonomy for the tests and so on. So. Like we would say that the reasonable suspicion cannot be granted in this scenario, and also like let's be frank, right? I think that the
Wait, hold on.
point of
Wait. You're just saying so many random things. Reasonable suspicion. Every time you say something like this, I feel like intuitively what you're striking at is you actually don't see the 64 cells as a baby. Because none of these other statements would apply if we were talking about probably
I
to like an 8-month fetus or an actual born child. They're like, ooh, it's really inconvenient to investigate, or ooh, are we going to assume that they did something bad to the baby? If it was a born child, the answer would be yes, 11 out of 10 times. But because it's a fetus, you're like, oh, really? Like, I feel like you're intuitively hitting at the same point that a pro-choicer does.
not at all. Like not at all. What I'm saying, one, I believe in Solomon starts at the point of sentience, right? I'm a sentientist. We've been through this. But two, in relation to Trent's position, which I'm sort of standing here, it's the fact that there is the reasonable suspicion in relation to what is a highly risky, highly probabilistic explanation is like it has to be considered. Like we'll have to consider that, okay, is someone reasonably likely to have deliberately terminated this pregnancy or in fact going through a highly traumatic event right now? And does this justify us impeaching or imposing or trespassing on their rights to perform an intensive investigation, which is likely going to prove, or at least, 99 times out of 100, going to prove that it is actually just a miscarriage. And that's even if we could prove it in the first place. So
So
I
you
think
just
that I
wouldn't
think
investigate? You don't think it's worth investigating to see people are murdering babies?
I
Because some
think
people
that
might be uncomfortable
I,
with the
I don't
investigation?
think that's no. I think that I think that what I've said is that I would be wanting reasonable suspicion, like reasonable, like reasonable suspicion, where it's like, okay, why do we believe this isn't an ordinary miscarriage?
So a woman
Um,
goes into a hospital and she's like
mhm,
a little bit intoxicated and she's having severe stomach cramps. And then she finds out that she wasn't pregnant and she miscarried.
mhm.
Are we getting like a manslaughter charge here,
If she finds out she wasn't pregnant and she miscarried, I don't
or
think
find no
that,
no
and
find out she was pregnant and she miscarried?
yeah, let's sorry, if she was unaware that she was pregnant, I
Hmm.
don't think that anyone is going to be wanting to charge them.
Why?
Because like for the same reason that if you knock someone over in a car on a road because you didn't see them round the corner and you had no way to see them round the corner or no reason to predict that they were going to be there, and you're following all the rules of the road, you're not getting a manslaughter charge because you've
I'm
not done
almost
something that
positive
is.
you almost are always getting a manslaughter charge because they'll say you were driving too fast for conditions or you didn't have your headlights on or something
No,
else,
I'm saying
right?
let's assume you are. Let's just assume you are driving at a reasonable speed. You had your headlights on,
Yep.
but you couldn't see them, right? There was no way you saw them. Like they walked in front of the car, like whatever. It happens, right? Accidents happen. That's the same thing.
I think it would depend on the exact circumstances. Like I can imagine in some cases where you're correct, but for the woman, like the woman is being negligent because she's had sex, so it's possible that she could be pregnant, right? Like there's a reasonable chance that you could be pregnant if you're having sex.
Yes, I mean, if you were to say like, was the woman on birth control and stuff like that
Yeah,
as
even if
well,
you're
you
on
could.
birth control, we're talking about. Remember, this is your position. We're talking
It's not
about
my
murder.
position. This is
No, no,
Trent's position, but I'm
this is
standing it.
Trent's
Yeah,
position. We're talking about murdering babies or killing babies, right?
yeah.
And in all those involuntary manslaughter charges that you're bringing up, you better believe there's a full investigation every time. You wouldn't be able to just tell the police, "Oh my God, the guy just popped out. I didn't see him," and they wouldn't go, oh, "Okay, that's chill. We're not going to investigate. That's fine." Like there's going to be a full investigation every single time.
I think if we're talking, yeah, but the whole point is that if we're talking at like the rates and like, what do you think our infant mortality rate would have to be to match the rate of miscarriages in like just generally? Like it would the whole
I've seen
point is
anywhere
that
from 15 to 50% of pregnancies miscarry, depending on the
yeah,
numbers
like
you said. Sure.
there's a huge difference. Like we not only do pragmatically can we afford to put these resources in, but we have a much greater reason to believe that there was essentially foul play. And that's even with SIDS.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I'm just saying that if you truly believe these are real babies dying, then we need to treat it with the gravity of a real baby dying.
Every crime is serious, but reasonable suspicion is applied in every single case. And I don't think that you're not giving the same gravity.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
but
don't
I'm
think
just saying
all
that, like,
deaths aren't investigated in the
yeah, I
same way,
know, but I'm
right?
just saying that, like, of all the grand total of all the things happening in the universe right now, a pro-lifer's number one thing shouldn't even be to stop abortions. It should probably be to find ways to combat miscarriages. That should be like the most important thing because that is the greatest loss of life that's happening on the planet right now. It's not genocide, it's not abortion, it's miscarriages. And then I've seen up to 40% of miscarriages could be prevented as well. That people involved in like heavy lifting, some sort of alcoholic consumption, because just things that women do. I think even staying up late was a predictor. Things that women do because they just don't know they're pregnant. And the very early stages of pregnancy can be predictive of miscarriages. But that should be
Yeah,
like
I
the
mean, but
number
you can't
one
even
health issue.
detect pregnancy at
There's a
many of the
really easy
stages.
way to detect pregnancy, and that's if a dick has been inside of you and is ejaculating. If you know that's happening, then there are probably
Not
some
with birth
precautions.
control, like that's the thing. Like with
Sure,
birth
even with birth
control, it
control, though.
eliminates 99.9%, and it can
99
stop
point,
you.
what if I told you that you were engaged in an accident, there's a 0.1% chance of murdering a child? Do you
Yeah,
think
like
you'd
if
just
you
be
let's say
like blasé about it?
no, but like yeah,
I
we'll
You're
speak. But like,
laughing because
what do
it's
you
funny,
think
but
the
I agree
rates
it
of?
is funny. But it is funny because you don't really consider that fetus to be a baby the same way. Because if this is a baby, then you would be treating it as the gravity situation. But it's funny because like it's a fucking 2-cell petri dish fetus. Of course it's funny, which I agree it is funny. But
I think that it's not even just that. Like, look at it like this. Like, if I was to go and drive a car on the road, there is a certain percentage that I'm going to be in a serious accident, or even just an accident, and I should take all of those accidents seriously. But that wouldn't stop me driving a car because we'd say that there's reasonable risk. Now, I'm not one of those people that's going to say that sex should only be for reproduction. I don't think that's the case. Maybe that Trent or some other Catholic is going to actually affirm that sex only has the purpose of reproduction. I think that it has more than the purpose of reproduction. I think pleasure and I think, well, specifically love is essentially the overall the unity of two people in terms of their desires. I think that's a lovely thing. I don't know why we'd want to get rid of that, right? Now, let's take that you've got someone on contraceptive, they're engaging in this action. There's very, very small chance to believe that they're actually going to be impregnated. They don't realize that they're pregnant until after the miscarriage. I think that that we could say that this person did not have any of the prerequisites necessary for committing a crime. Something like the guilty mind, like mens rea. Were they intentionally or committing this action that was like essentially
Well,
either
hold on. Mens
uh,
rea doesn't mean that you intended to harm somebody. The mens rea could just be that you were being reckless, right? Like the
yeah.
mens rea for involuntary manslaughter is not I was trying to kill somebody and it happened lightly, right? It could just be you're engaged in a negligent behavior.
Yes. So are you saying that all like under Trent's view, you're saying that all sex with protection would still be reckless if you want
Taking
testing
high
or
precautions,
taking
yeah,
precautions,
yeah,
right?
because
I
you're
mean,
in like you're in like murder baby mode essentially. Yeah, you might kill a child.
right.
That's a really big deal, I think. Do you think? I feel like that. I feel like killing children is a really big deal. Yeah.
I mean, I would agree. Killing children is a really big deal. I just don't know whether they would affirm that this is because it is the percentage, right? It depends on it depends on what protection you're using. Like if you're using the pull out method, then yeah, I think most people are going to say lock them the fuck up. You know, your pull out game was too weak, you're going to jail. Um, but I think the alternative is also that they were using like a highly effective form of contraception, let's say even multiple forms of contraception, and yet there is this freak accident. Um, but the problem is that that's also in terms of miscarriages. There's no way to know whether this was an absolute freak accident in relation to two people taking every precaution necessary to engage in what is a loving act and a good act to engage in for a couple to enjoy versus they're being blasé and not giving a fuck about, infants. And there's just no way, and that's not including the fact that there is also the people who do know they're pregnant and yet maybe take the risks. And then there's the people who do know they're pregnant and also, just have a tragic accident. Like that's the problem with this whole scenario is that there's just so fucking many that it's just like this. The pragmatics of it don't work out. And even the reasonable suspicion is going to be you're going to have some sort of tangible like you've done something fucking dodgy for me to be willing to investigate. It's like, look, when an old person dies, we don't make sure that they weren't smothered every fucking time, right? Or like someone like didn't slip them a pill because the die.
I understand everything you're saying. It's just none of this matters. But I know there's a lot of talking about. But like we're talking about killing children, and you're trying to give me this whole thing of like, well, it wouldn't be pragmatic to research it. It wouldn't be like I don't know if we've got the research. Like you're giving me all these things. Not a single one of these things would apply. The whole country was looking for Elizabeth Smart. We've got Amber Alerts on our phone to try to alert every single person in an area if a child has been abducted. People go above and beyond when it comes to helping and saving children. But that intuition is completely absent when it comes to the largest genocide of children in the world, which are miscarriages. It's not even there for an inkling of it. You don't even have the slightest feeling of like, maybe we should actually dramatically restructure the way society works to alleviate this problem. You don't even have you're just like, fuck it. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell if you kill a baby or not. Your entire argument summed up is like, it's kind of hard to tell if you kill a baby, and it's like, god damn, that's so many reasons. Like, fuck it. That's your entire argument, and you can say it in more words than that.
But why don't we do this for old people? Like, why, like loads, like old people are dying all over the fucking place, right? And it's a natural thing, like in the same way as a miscarriage is a natural thing,
We
right?
do.
And
We do an extraordinary amount. Look at how many homeless people can go into an emergency room over and over and over again and rack up bills that are 6-7 figures large sometimes. We do an extraordinary amount of care. It might not seem like it, but yeah, we have an extraordinary amount of care available for people in the United States that are funded by the federal government. But
yeah, we'll have an extraordinary amount of I mean, like whether the United States does enough, I think is very questionable. Let's take the case of like old people dying, old people's homes, hospitals, hospices, wherever, right? Like all of those, like you. I mean, let's be frank. Fucking every like 1 in 5 old people could be getting like murked at like, and we would have very little way to know whether that was the case, but we don't have any reasonable suspicion, right? Like in the same way, like is this have the hospital staff been attentive enough? Have they been given their medications on time? Have they been fed an adequate diet? Have they been laid down flat when they have? Have they been given wrong medications?
I don't understand what you're saying. This happens all the time. where there are old people's homes where they might mistreat patients. I'm pretty sure my grandma got a settlement because her tailbone got broken at the hospice or the whole person's homes that she was at when they were mistreating her. Yeah, these types of investigations, people care about this and investigate this type of stuff all the time.
But they only investigate when there's a reasonable suspicion. We don't investigate every death of every person at an old people's home, at a hospital or anything like that, do we? Like,
No,
even
but
though we
that's
would
usually,
all consider it
but that,
incredibly serious by your own standard, we
yeah, but that's
consider it
because the cause of
incredibly
death,
serious.
once people
And
are at that stage in life, the cause of death is usually like
and
they're
at
at
the
this.
same stage, inverted, a miscarriage is the most likely cause of death. And it's the
Okay,
same reasoning.
then let's say that is the same reasoning. Then why do you care about an abortion at like 6 weeks, 8 weeks? It was almost likely to die anyway. Is an abortion actually bad at this point then?
Because there's a very big difference between it happening because of a natural cause and me causing it to happen. Like Hurricane Katrina annihilating New Orleans, tragic. Wish it didn't happen. Maybe we could have done something about it. Not I'm gonna drop a nuke and just fucking flood New Orleans. Like there's a big fucking difference there.
I don't know if there is. If you're telling me that like
What?
you'd assume that it's gonna die anyway, because that's it seems like what you're saying for like a fetus. The assumption is you're probably gonna
You
miscarry,
just want
probably
to
gonna
nuke
die.
Florida. You're just wanting to nuke Florida. I can see it. I can feel it in your voice. Like it's like, come on, man. Of course, there's a big difference there. It's not that it's
If
going
there's
to
such
die
an
anyway.
assumption, if there's such an assumption of a fetus that there's a decent chance of it miscarrying anyway, who cares if someone has an abortion?
There's a decent chance that there's going to be a Category 4 or 5 hurricane hit Florida at some point. It doesn't mean that we should be trying to hurry the process along.
Correct, but on the contrary, what happens when those hurricanes happen? People take every single precaution. We don't just say, nobody would say, Cat 4 hurricane? Some people are probably going to die. Good luck. No, FEMA comes in, people evacuate cities, people get food in advance, people do everything they can to preserve life.
100%. You go to an emergency room. You say, I
But
think I'm having a miscarriage. I need
in your world, a Cat
progesterone.
4, no, in your world, a Cat 4 hurricane comes by and you're like, half are probably going to die anyway. Good luck. Keep working.
I think like that. I don't think that this makes sense, right? Because I think that look, we're saying that these are highly risky scenarios, right? And we'll not investigate every single scenario. That doesn't translate to fuck it, kill them anyway. I don't see how that. I don't see that how that follows.
Because it sounds to me like you're basically, if you're at a point where you expect most of them to die, and if it does die, most of the time we're not even going to investigate because they're probably going to die anyway, then you've essentially fabricated the right of like, I mean, if people want to kill it that early, like who cares? Most of them are going to die anyway. We're not going to bother investigating most of it. Like, why not? It feels like that's essentially the world that you've constructed.
Well, that's the same thing as old people. Like, if fuck it, if we're not going to kill them at that point anyway, like who's gonna like no? But like if we have reasonable suspicion, we're going to investigate because it's a wrong. It's just that unfortunately nature's a bit of a bitch at times.
We don't
And
treat old people that way though. I don't know why you keep saying that. We do everything we can to preserve the life of those older people. Cause of death is generally known. If an old person goes into an old person's house and they die in 3 days, nobody's just saying like, old person, they died. There'd probably be an investigation there.
well, yeah. Well, I mean, like, if you mean like if there was like there would only be an investigation if there wasn't reason to believe they died of a natural cause in a natural way. Like that's why we would say the circumstances are not suspicious, and then there's no investigation, right? Like,
Yeah, but there's probably some sort of like post-mortem done or something generally.
I don't think so. Like, I think there's a cause of death that's attributed, but like, I don't think that given like full autopsies to every
Not
old
like a
person.
full autopsy, but you'll know. Like if somebody has Alzheimer's disease and develops like pneumonia and starts dying from complications of that, you're not going to cut into them. But like the whole like thing is kind of laid out.
Yeah. So if someone has so if there's a miscarriage and it's a really high likelihood, in the same way that there were like a 70 or 8 well like an 89-year-old gets pneumonia or she's been coughing for 3 days and then falls down dead, it's like, yeah, she could have, like, it's very possible someone came in with a fucking pillow and
Yeah,
smothered
but if
her.
somebody falls
Like,
down dead in a house, you would investigate that. Same way if somebody comes in with a miscarriage, you should probably also investigate that as well, I think. I'm just saying if we're truly killing babies here, it feels like it's worth looking into, but
I think I would just apply the same reasoning to the elderly. Like, man, I think
we
there could be
do.
I
We
think
do
there's a
for every
genocide going on right now. Like they're
I don't
killing
I
all of the
understand.
geriatrics.
Yeah, maybe you just don't have any experience with this, but people absolutely care about this and people absolutely do look into this. There's a reason why, especially for like Hispanic communities, it's probably true for white people too, but like putting your mom in like a home is like one of the most disgusting, disrespectful, and rude things that you can do as a child. At least in Cuban communities, bro. My family, holy shit. When it came to, that's why my mom left me when I was 16 to move to fucking Florida to take care of her mom. The idea of putting older family in homes, this is a thing that everybody talks about. I don't know if you think that like most
To be
people
fair,
just
I think
send
you're
their
right. Yeah.
yeah, so I don't know what you come to this thing like, oh, like, well, when we start taking older people dying seriously, like, people do take older people dying seriously. It's a really serious thing. It's not blasé
I
at all.
agree, but then, but from this standard, like, do you think that, like, from your standard, which is essentially like, if we were to consider this a human, like, in terms of the miscarriage, we should be doing a full investigation simply because this is a negative scenario? Why wouldn't we do that with old people? Like, in every time an old person dies, full
You have
autopsy.
because you
The
have
fucking
no, you're not you can
CSI
obfuscate as
breaks the
much as you
door down.
want. I know it's funny to obfuscate, but you're only obfuscating. We don't do it with old people because they're already in a medical environment where they've got a medical history and the cause of death is more often than not known. If you want to make this an accurate comparison, stop comparing it to old people in homes, compare it to an old person dying at their house and then police being called or 911 coming and finding a body. Because that's what a miscarriage is. Miscarriages don't often happen where you're in a hospital in a monitored environment, doctors keep it happening, and then you have a miscarriage, right? If you want to talk about like a miscarriage in a hospital, that's a more equivalent comparison here. But right now, we're talking about a dead baby is brought from a house to a hospital, and every time there's going to be an investigation. That's what a miscarriage is to you. If you're in the pro-life position, or to Trent, a dead baby is brought from a house to a hospital.
Just
Okay,
real
like,
quick,
so-
I looked this up. From what I can tell, 25 million babies die from miscarriages each year. 73 million are aborted each year. So there seems to be a pretty big discrepancy between
Hold up.
almost
Wait.
three times the amount.
73
I
million
would be
babies are
very,
aborted
I'd be
every
very
year?
surprised. I'd be very surprised if that's the case. Like,
That's
to
like
be
This
frank,
is-
every woman of birthing age getting pregnant and aborting every single year in the United States.
Yeah, so this is roughly 121 million unintended pregnancies occurred each year between 2015 and 2019. Of these unintended pregnancies, 61 ended in abortion. This translates to 73 million abortions per year.
Wait, half of women in the Is this worldwide or is this in the
Yes,
United
this is
States?
worldwide. This is
Oh,
worldwide.
okay.
all right, okay, right.
This is worldwide. I'm having trouble finding just the U.S. numbers right now.
Okay, yeah, right. That does make a lot more sense. To be fair, that does. Okay, but then I mean, the miscarriages should be way higher than that. I mean,
But
especially
the
in
reality
in
is most people probably don't even know when they
Don't-
miscarry. Or
yeah,
a lot
or
of them.
even wouldn't even have
Yeah,
the
maybe.
means to do anything about it when they did. Like the most of the world is like, was it like a third of the world lives under the dollar, like a day, like no access to real medical treatment. So like the miscarry, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I can't
I
find
mean,
just the U.S. numbers right now, but that is like, yeah, worldwide there seems to be a huge difference between miscarriages and abortions, and it
Like, I
seems
think it'd be
like from
fair
what
to
I
say-
understand, the like first world countries are the ones having the most abortions. I doubt they're having the most miscarriages. So the stat that or what was brought up.
Every abortion is going to be recorded, but probably half of miscarriages will be reported because for some women, like you can just have a really, really shitty period after like getting pregnant and you're not even aware that you're miscarrying. Like that
Sure,
can happen.
Yeah.
That's a possibility.
I'm not even contesting that. It's more so that it's obvious that there's way more miscarriages than there are abortions, when it seems like worldwide there's 3 times the amount of abortions than there are miscarriages that we have on record. So even if we double, triple that, there's still going to be about the same amount.
right. I mean, like I think to be fair, like the number of abortions, like that's like, you know, I think that, like, from Trent's case, I think that is like obviously a major issue, and I think that that's a distinction in kind from the miscarriage anyway, where the abortion is intentional, the miscarriage is accidental. Um, so I mean, like, it is fair to even say, like, obviously there's one thing, like, not investigating what might be, like, even if you were to say that this is police negligence to, like, or like, you know, it's something that we would want to do but it's not pragmatic. There's a difference in, obviously, in saying that means that we can just do it. But I mean, like, to be fair, like, I guess the reason I'm even invested in this is, like, I think that in your case, like with the child sex doll thing, right, like do you not, like, so you, like so that indicates to me that it is about consciousness to you. Like, there is something about human consciousness that you give a fuck about, that if you are basically, you get like a child looking 19, like it's got the brain of a 19-week, like basically, let's say like the sort of it has behaviors but not any real like unified cortex. You're willing to say like it can be used as like a sex doll, right? Like if it was just like I don't know, had the body of a 3-year-old but the mind of a 19-week-year-old or something. You are fine with that, right?
Body of a 3-year-old, but a mind of a 9-week-old. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, like 19-week or whatever, like before
19 weeks. Yeah, sure.
like yeah. Um so just why? like, like surely even extrinsically, man, you would be like, that's just going to propagate a lot of horrible fucking human beings, right? Like there's going to
Yeah,
be
but that's a
people that,
totally different thing. My position on animal torture would be the same. That like people
right,
that torture
okay,
animals are more often than not going to be horrible human beings. It's probably a really big
right,
predictor of it.
right, it is. I mean, like if you look at like the rates of people who kill animals for a living, the psychological damage of people to people who kill animals for a living, you can track that basically alongside report and arrest rates for violence. So like you double the size of a
Well,
slaughterhouse, you can double the rate, and that's controlling for factors such as ethnicity, sex, religion, poverty, like major contributors to like variables in terms of criminal action, and well, specifically violent criminal action, right?
I'd be interested in seeing that, but sure.
Yeah. So like if we take that, at least could you say that like it would, so if the person, like, right, like just out of curiosity, at what point does it become okay to produce essentially a class of people who are either raping baby sex dolls or murdering people, and overall is going to have a very negative psychological like societal effect? I think we could agree,
I
like
don't think we should
most
ever have
likely
people that are murdering, or
animals rather.
that are raping like non-functional child bodies. I don't think that would ever be
Right.
good for humanity.
Why would you be okay with the animals then? Because I'm assuming it's the same extrinsic
Because
reasoning,
there's
right?
like there's a function for harvesting animals and eating them that I
Yeah, but
don't
there's
think
the
there's a
real
good function.
psychological effect of what people turn into when they commit these jobs.
I would have to. I don't think I believe that's a real thing. I'd have to read about
Right.
that.
Okay.
I don't
So
know
you
if like
just
factory farmers or people that like harvest animals are like predisposed towards committing violence. I've never heard that
you
before. It's
even have
possible.
farmers. Farmers even have diminished like empathy studies on farmers show diminished empathy. But like in terms of slaughterhouses, it's much more profound. And we haven't even, obviously, this is all based on the human effect. If it's all extrinsic, zoological diseases, like, do you not even care about any of that? The fact that the risk of COVID would basically be negligible if people stopped eating meat, or the
The
effects on the
risk of
climate, the effects
COVID
on
would be negligible.
like COVID like disease, like a zoonotic disease. So like whether it's SARS or another kind of SARS, or whether it's
I don't know if
uh,
is the only way for animal to human transmission through consumption of.
well, it's just through direct contact, and the real purpose of direct contact is by breeding billions of animals, coming into contact with them daily, and then uh, killing and eating them. So like if you
I
think
thought
like
one of the
slaughterhouses,
largest reservoirs for zoonotic to human transfer of diseases was like bats, and it's not because we eat them. I thought it's because we contact them, but they're like a big reservoir of. But I mean, like
bats
you can make.
bats like I don't think I think bats have are more likely to you're more likely to contract certain diseases from bats, but one number one source of diseases is actually pigs because of the biological similarity. So like if you look towards things like swine flu, the reason that we like give such a fuck about swine flu is because we are so like pigs that when a pig gets a disease, it can pass, well, like well, pretty much any form of flu, it can pass straight to a human. So it can basically, like, swine flu is a massive threat to humanity. Yet we will and one of the reasons that even like we worry about bats is because bats come into contact with the pigs more often than humans come into contact with bats, and they can pass it to pigs, and then as soon as it evolves to pigs, we get murked by the there was a film actually that did like on this. It was like called like Pandemic or whatever, where like it was like a new kind of SARS. It was before COVID. A new kind of SARS develops because a bat bites a pig or some shit, and then the people, like a chef doesn't wash his hands after touching a dead pig, shakes someone's hand, and it starts a global pandemic. Like if we look at like what's like the actual risk here. It's like it's not even small. Like swine flu, bird flu, tuberculosis, like pretty much all of our major diseases are linked to creating huge artificial populations of animals in confined and filthy environments, only to then
Yeah, I mean,
basically.
that would be something you'd have to weigh, I guess. And do you think that eating meat is worth the diseases? But I mean, there's a lot of zoonotic, like West Nile. Didn't that come from? Wasn't that a mosquito? I'm pretty sure there are a lot of pandemics and stuff that have started that haven't come. Now, I'm sure that I mean, eating pigs and animal harvesting and everything probably also breeds a whole bunch of bacteria and shit, which is that's why we killed all the Native Americans. I think when we came to the United States, right? Because there were so many more viruses that were endemic to European peoples. So,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I would
Smallpox
agree.
being one of the bigger ones there. Like, yeah, like smallpox was, I think it was, I don't know if it was goats or something, but yeah, but like essentially, like, it's that. And I'm
Oh,
just wondering, like,
malaria is
if the
another one. Yeah.
risk, yeah, I'm just wondering why, like, right, if we're looking at it like purely, because if this is purely extrinsic, right, in the sense that the only reason you're against people having child sex doll things is because of the behavioral consequences, right? I'm assuming it's that. Then
Mhm.
why would and the consequences to the broader society? Why wouldn't we say the same thing about something like zoonotic diseases?
I mean, you could. It would just depend on how bad the zoonotic
I
diseases
mean, for
get.
you, I mean, like, why wouldn't
Because I
you
don't
be
think
like, oh,
I don't think
that's
I'm so threatened by zoonotic diseases that I would mandate the entire world should be moving off of meat.
really? Like, so you think that like
I don't know if
the
they're that
threat
much of
of
an existential threat to mankind. I
really,
don't think
like,
that is
even
the
after
case.
COVID, even after the massive lockdowns, the millions of people dying, like the fucking the way that certain diseases have had, like COVID was now, right? Really, like, I want to point out COVID was absolutely fucking nothing for zoonotic diseases. There's diseases that have like Ebola has a death rate of up to 50%.
Yeah, but I
Like,
don't think Ebola is as big a deal because people die and they are symptomatic of it when they have it like very quickly,
but
right?
that's the
Like,
thing, you're relying upon it basically locking in the right mutagens, right? Like or like was it antigens or whatever, where like basically if it mutates the right way, it 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 can become like an unbelievable risk really quickly. Which is why, like, so like for example, there's forms of swine flu that have basically a that can kill like 20% of the people it comes in contact with, right? But it's just that it hasn't evolved into such a disease yet that it's asymptomatic for like the first 10 days, yet still spreads. Like, that could happen. There's no reason like that couldn't happen, and
what
even
about
be
like E.
quite possible,
coli
like
developing into
plausible.
something more like lethal or whatever?
What, sorry?
What about like E. coli like changing or mutating into something more? Isn't
Oh
that like
yeah,
a
I mean it
vegetable born?
happens.
That's like
No,
a
I think it's
vegetable.
waterborne. It's water,
What?
isn't it? It's like the water. I mean, like obviously like that, but I mean we do try to stop that, right? We'll put like chlorine in water and shit like that we'll wash vegetables with chlorine and stuff like that to try and stop this from growing. I think. But like yeah, I mean like we should try to mitigate those risks. But this seems like it seems
What
like
if
a
it was the
huge
case
risk.
that fruits and vegetables poison more Americans than beef or chicken?
I mean like, wait a minute. If it was the case,
Yeah.
like it's not, but like, are you saying just hypothetically?
Are you sure it's not?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's not. Like, have you ever, like, as everyone went, "Ooh, you didn't cook that apple. Be careful." But versus like chicken or pork,
Yeah, but I've eaten
like,
billions of pounds of chicken, billions of pounds of
yeah,
chicken,
I'm
but
not
I
saying that
haven't.
you're gonna die
But
every time.
you
I'm
just
just
well,
saying
no,
the
no,
risk of
the risk is zero if you cook it. Internal temperature of chicken is
it's not a risk of
155.
zero. Like, even if you cook it, like the risk's not zero. But the like just in terms of like the risk of it being improperly prepared, like people not following social protocol, like the overall risks of society, like surely that plays a factor here. You're relying upon people essentially, like convincing people to wear masks during COVID, fairly difficult. Convincing people to wash their hands, as like I see all the time, like at my local bakery, people I've seen it at least twice, three times. They've touched like bacon, raw bacon, and then they'll touch something else without washing their hands, like a door or you some other part of the like sort of preparation area, that if the now is kind of contaminated, right? If they go and then touch that again and then serve a customer, if there was a disease present, it could spread something. So like
Doesn't
even
this hurt
I
your
don't
argument
like,
from earlier about risk versus utility?
Who's?
Perspective philosophies. It seemed like earlier you were making an argument that like we drive cars just because like there's a utility to driving cars, yet there's still a risk to it, right? You were making like a ton of arguments earlier about risk versus utility.
I don't
And
think that I think there's a difference between rational risk and irrational risk. Like it's not that like we would deem something so essential towards our lives. Like it's the question. I mean, what I'm essentially asking Destiny is why is meat so essential to his life and his happiness that he considers it absolutely worth like risking the death of millions of people and catastrophic consequences in ways that is not comparable to driving a car and there being a car accident. Like at all. And also I wouldn't say utility so much, but yeah.
I mean, it seems like access to meat and meat products is a pretty big shortcut for most people around the world. It seems like it's easier for a lot of people to acquire. It seems like there are a lot of like vegetable and fruit-borne illnesses that make people sick as well. I don't know if the risk is as great. I feel like the environmental risk is probably a stronger argument than risk of viruses, but
Oh, I definitely don't. I think risk of virus is probably the largest. But I mean, yeah, I mean, then there's I mean, but that's the thing. It's not even the only one. But these compile, right? So you've got the environmental case. Then you've also got the psychological damage that it may be doing to thousands of workers. You've got the antibiotic resistance and the fact that animals are fed antibiotics and you're being passed them. Like just purely extrinsically, I'm just wondering, like, if the child sex doll thing is concerning, I don't know why this wouldn't be.
because the child sex doll has absolutely no positive like enjoying a piece of meat is a lot different than enjoying like simulated child rape.
Well, I would agree, but I think for different reasons. Like, I would say that is vicious. Like, I would take a virtue ethical response to this, not a consequential one. Would you? Is that what you're saying? Is that it's not? It's not about the consequences. It's just about the action itself. That it's wrong.
No, I'm not saying the action is wrong. I'm just saying it'd be predictive of like I don't think somebody that eats a cheeseburger is necessarily going to go on and become a serial killer, but somebody that's raping child sex dolls is
No,
probably
but someone who eats a cheeseburger might be paying into a system which causes the death of millions of people from a zoonotic disease. If we're just talking about consequences, it doesn't matter what their intentions were, right?
I guess I don't know. I would have to see the overall risks and likelihood of transitioning to vegan food supplies and all that. I guess I don't know.
So you don't think that it's at least plausible that the risk is greater to society? Then let's say there was like how many pedophiles? Like how often do you think this would even
Anything is
happen?
plausible. I don't know. We're on hypothetical after hypothetical after hypothetical. It's plausible that we switch the entire world's food supply over to some vegan thing, and then some big plague wipes out all the crops, and then we die because we don't have animal agriculture anymore. Like there's a lot of things that are
I mean, if a
plausible.
big plague wiped out all of the crops, we would all die anyway because that's what we feed the animals.
That is not true. Animals don't eat the same food that humans eat.
They eat primarily like yeah, but like they eat like primarily like cereals, but they do eat a lot of the same foods like soy, corn. These are largely like animal foods. Like I think it's 70 to 90% of the calories in of soy are fed
Cows
to.
are mainly eating grasses, legumes, alfalfa, clover, and hay. How much of this do we eat? We can eat legumes, right? Do we eat the same type as cows? I don't think we can eat alfalfa. I don't think we eat clover or hay. I know you can chew on a piece if you want to be cool, and I don't think we generally eat grass.
I'm not
chewing
sure
on
how
hay
much
is
of
cool.
I think that like in terms of the overall calories, I'll have to double check. Like, but I will say like based on the fact that um the overall calories that are fed to animals from something like soy, corn, being 70 to 90%, I think indicates primarily that, well, one, we are feeding a lot of food we can't eat to animals,
Oh, it's
and
the difference between
two, we would
factory farm cows and
struggle,
sure.
we would struggle to even produce like if it's non-factory farm, we're just talking about grass. There is nowhere near enough grassland to feed the world's population. Not even close. Like not even it would take an absolutely absurd amount of land to feed the world's population on grass-fed animals. So it's not even worth mentioning. Like it's either factory farming or it's nothing in terms of the survival, like existentially of the human race. Like it and that's not even considering the fact that it seems to have existential risks I don't know, like just from your point of view, right? Like that's all I'm saying. Like I'm not like go vegan right now. You know, I'm not expecting anything like that. What I'm just saying is that if you're saying that it's purely consequential and that's the way you're analyzing it, I don't know why you wouldn't apply the same risk criterion
Because
to.
all of these risk criteria are incredibly difficult to manage. Like you telling me that like the zoonotic device is going to wipe out mankind, you have no idea if that's true or not. We might go another 5,000 years without a virus similar to COVID, or the next huge virus that wipes us out might come from vegetation.
Look
Right?
at it
It's
like this. Like
impossible to like weigh all of these things together. Like
you
I
could
can't.
go.
You like give me like a Drake's equation of like the end of humanity based on meat consumption.
It doesn't have to even be the end of humanity. It just has to be a significant amount of deaths, right?
It does,
Like
or
to the
not,
point.
or whatever. You know what I mean. I'm being
Yeah, I
hyperbolic,
know what
but
you
you know,
mean. No, that's fair
but I'm
enough.
just saying that you're giving me like, what about this subjective factor compatible with this subjective
Oh,
factor compatible with this subjective factor? Why don't you change the
how
entire
many?
world's food source? Like that's I don't know. I don't know what the measurement is of any of these things. I
Right.
have no
But if we
idea.
just look at the risk of pandemics and like, look, so we've had swine flu, bird flu before COVID, then we had mad cow's disease, foot and mouth, and then that's not including the ones that have actually already spread and actually are causing us problems right now. So like the risk is clearly pretty severe because we do already, a lot of us already die from these zoonotic diseases.
Where did
Like
the Black
influenza
Death, the
kills a
plague?
lot of us.
Where did the plague come from?
The plague come from lice or like what are they called? Fleas on small mammals, typically rats.
Okay, so then the deadliest virus of all of, or the deadliest bacteria of all of humankind didn't even come from factory farming or animals. It came from rats. So
I mean,
I don't know if
one,
anything
the
you're saying. So like
plague,
we could stop all the factory farming in the world and switch to vegetation, and we
the
can still get
plague's
wiped
not
out
the
by the same thing.
deadliest virus. Actually, influenza's far more deadly than the plague. It's just that it doesn't have the same existential, sort of connotations. Way more people die from influenza than die from the plague.
Is that just because of how many people exist on the planet today, or?
It's just because, like, one, like the actual likelihood of contracting influenza numerous times in your life is much higher. It's not curable through antibiotics. It's it can be pretty fucking rough. The flu can actually, like, if you've got a diminished immune system, the flu will just take you the fuck out. So the flu is dangerous as fuck. Like that's why we make such a big deal about vaccinating against it.
Okay.
Okay, I've got some questions. I don't mean to keep giving you guys whiplash, but earlier we were talking about consciousness and like why you value consciousness. Destiny, is there like a point within evolution that you think humans gain this consciousness, that you think we started to value this, or do you think like all throughout our evolution we just happen to value our own kind?
I'm sure there's probably some like, what is it, like Cro-Magnon Neanderthal or some shit. There was some bridge or whatever that for some reason doesn't exist anymore. But there was probably some diminished or half state in between us and something else that would have provided like a interesting challenge to how we view ourselves in the world. Or if we find aliens that are more developed than us or something, or similarly developed, it would probably challenge our perception of where we exist in the universe.
Do you
I'm just
think
wondering why it would be. Sorry, I'll let you continue.
do you think we would automatically value aliens if they had like a consciousness, but it was let's say they look like worms, they don't really have eyes, they but it's obvious they have like a high form of consciousness. Do you think we would automatically value them, or do you think we would still just value humans more than them?
I have no idea. It would probably depend on the level of sophistication and the appearance of the things, would be my guess, and their organization as well. Like, for instance, if we ran into things that function like ants, we probably wouldn't treat them like people because we don't like colonies of things. We'd probably want them to be like one, like sentient beings contained in one, or I don't know. There's probably a lot of things that would influence that.
Like an
But
individualistic being, you mean?
sure.
Um,
Like humans are like self-contained sentient creatures that have all their shit. Like an ant colony is like different, right?
yeah. So, because so with consciousness, like you're saying that it's intuitive at some point, or subjective, but the it does seem like every time you still kind of come back to it just being about humans. Like it's just about humans being alive, that that's what we value. And I did you change on this? I never heard you talk about like intuition when talking about moral or like
A little
meta
bit, but
ethics
I don't.
until
I just usually don't bounce around these topics because, in my opinion, it's a total waste of time. Abortion and veganism are usually the two that I just don't dip in too much because it's the highest effort to the lowest like reward and possible like value in ever discussing. So there are other things I usually prefer to talk about.
Can I just ask though, like, because like one, you have been talking about it a lot recently, which is basically, I mean, I've been watching your debates with Vegan Gains, Trent. You were on with those girls, those pro-lifers and stuff. So it's kind of something that you've been doing a lot of, right? Which is why it sort of sparked my interest. Why obviously Tom's doing this panel, or wanted to do the panel, and obviously it didn't like obviously like sort of actualize in the way that would have been ideal for the environment. But the point is that obviously it's something you've been engaged a lot in, and it's sparked quite a lot of conversation around your position. So if you think that it's all like, because like from what I can tell, to be honest, I'm very unsure as to whether you are valuing a specific kind of consciousness or if it's just an abstract category of human consciousness and it's just sort of pulling a lot of ethical weight for you. Do you know what I mean? So if
Yeah,
you're not
there's ways
interested
of
in the
doing that. The
topic,
reason why I don't dive much into it is because it's just going to be a needless circle jerk of vegan debate servers and then maybe like pro-life people like trying to like insert their opinion of what is the objectively correct answer and all this. And the real life policy and even moral implications are so unbelievably infinitesimally small that it's like I wouldn't even bother to waste my. There's a million other things I'd rather be talking about, researching, investigating, or arguing than trying to figure out like what is the moment of the beginning of like human life or what is the measurable material or immaterial difference between animal and human consciousness. There are like so many more interesting things to talk about, in my opinion.
I mean, it's just more of like the fact, like, I mean, that's fair enough. It's just one of the things that it's basically why have you been doing it if you're so uninterested?
Because I got the first one was he said that he wanted me to go down a debate. I was already doing a bunch of other podcasts and I was fine. And I assumed that we were going to have a conversation about that. And then it was going to pivot into like other things relating to what that podcast normally talks about. I didn't know it was going to be a 5-hour debate on abortion. I had no idea it was literally going to be. There's no way that I would agree to a 5. There's literally a joke in my community that abortion and veganism are the two topics that I just don't debate that much because they're so obnoxious to me. I wouldn't have gone if it was that. But then it ended up being that, and of course, obviously, there are other people that want to debate, and it's like usually one debate like leads to other debates, and I'll do it. But it's not like okay, I can't wait to make abortion and veganism like mainstays of like my debate platform for the next like few months. It was just a thing that
I mean, look, that's fair. That's fair enough. I mean, I will say that it has obviously sparked a lot of, I think, controversy in terms of people like the pro-lifers obviously getting mad. I think vegans, I think vegans are more confused at your position. I think like I will say like from my experience with the vegan community, it's more of the fact like in the vegan gains conversation in the first one, you'll say something like semantic and understanding, and by that you meant qualia.
Yeah, I
and then
understand. Yeah, I understand. There's a whole bunch of like terminology and verbs that I could clarify. I don't care to. I don't care for the conversation. I don't care to. Some of my positions might even seem inconsistent or whatever, and they might be. If I were to take like some weeks to like measure out, like finitely detail, like these are the exact blah, 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 then I could probably do that and have a more consistent or clear stance. But I just don't care. I have zero care whatsoever. There's probably people who hear me talk about computer science and get triggered when I say something's wrong. They're probably like, there's a ton of topics like that I don't know everything about. This is just a topic that I super do not give a fuck. Like spending a whole bunch of time like investigating and weeding out like all my thoughts on it because I just don't care that much about it. And I'm sure there are a ton of vegans that feel a certain type of way about it, and that's totally fine. But I don't.
I mean, like, look, I get it. I will say this, right? I think that in some respects, it seemed like from my position of watching like the abortion debates, and sometimes when you're debating vegans, it seems like you care a lot. And then I think that there's other times when it's convenient not to care.
Well,
and I think that those times,
care a lot. When do I?
Like you're invested. Like you're invested.
I mean, I'm invested.
In
If somebody gets on the server sounds like shouting at me or whatever, I'll care whatever. But I'm not like invested. Like, guys, we're gonna spend a lot of time like contemplating veganism and abortion. No. I don't think I've ever done like a
it seems
full
like you
research
care
stream
about
on like abortion or veganism before. I don't think in my entire life.
It seems like you care about the consequences of people living their lives in relation to these two ethical dilemmas. Like if someone is if pro-life was to proliferate across the United States, it sounds like you would care about it, right?
Yeah, probably. But none of these conversations about people that are pro-life or pro-choice are getting to this level of depth ever for policy discussion.
Well, I mean, like Trent got pretty deep. I think like
Trent is not an average person.
Okay,
Trent has a master's in philosophy, biology, and Catholic theology.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, to be fair, that is fair enough. So is that the only reason that you would say so? Like in relation to this, it's more of the fact that you think that this could be resolved, like normally resolved at a more shallow level and you can't be fucked to go deeper.
Yeah.
Right. And you don't see that as maybe as a little like it's just more of the fact that it's just like a total convenience thing. Like
Yeah, there's only so much time I have to do certain things, and this is just not how I want to spend my time doing on this.
I understand that. Like obviously, like I'm sure there's things that I could care more about, but I don't. Like I'm not really invested in I don't know like needle spending or something, right? You know what I mean? But I'm pretty sure it's important. So I get that. Like it just comes to the point of like I'm not saying don't do the debates, but I'm saying if you're taking such a fervent stance against someone who, like, for example, you believe is knowledgeable, or like even against like vegan gains, where it's about something that you've even admitted to be super complex and intricate, why take such a hard stance? Like with me, you've went, I don't know, I don't give a fuck. When I've
I'll
pushed you,
present my opinion,
do you
and
know what
I
I
present my
mean?
opinion here. But like vegan games, he jumps in here to shout at me about things. I'm not like DMing him like, hey, we should have a debate on
Fair
this
enough.
topic. Or whatever. He comes in here, he wants to shout me something like, okay, what do you want to talk about today, or whatever. And then I'll give my spiel or whatever about it. And then sometimes it drags into a longer thing. But it's not like I'm seeking him out for these conversations. He just has perms to jump on my Discord. Somebody jumps in and he shouts at me over things. Like that's it.
But in the long run, like, is it just that like you sort of the humor in them, or is it that like because I don't know, like I'm not like sort of like it's sort of meta debate, right? I don't want to fucking pull into it, but it just seems like it seems that you give a fuck about the consequences. It seems that you give a fuck about the idea of you like harming children and or harm to children and harm to humans and shit like that. And right now you're caught between these two communities that both think you're being inconsistent, and you sort of rather than resolving that inconsistency whilst engaging in debate, like so fervently taking like such a very specific fucking stance, by the way, where like it's not even just it's not even just consciousness, it's a kind of consciousness. It's not that it's a human, right? It's not that it's an animal. It's this very specific phenomenal experience which may really, let's be honest, not even exist in infants, but you would still not be okay with it. So there's all of this, right? That is your baggage in this sort of scenario, right? And I get that's fine, right? Because these debates are complex as fuck. Researchers debate them for years. Like one of me mods came in and basically said, I don't think like Vegan Gains or Destiny could have this conversation. And I responded, I'm not sure who could have this conversation when we're talking about the philosophy of mind and neuroscience to the point in which brain is conscious and which isn't. Like, I don't know who the fuck go, oh yeah, actually that one, I can tell it from the photo. Like, so I get that this is complex as fuck, but then why not just go, actually, uh, I don't know why I hold this position. I maybe need to introspect some more, maybe look
Because
into it.
I think that my position is good for 99% of conversations. But if somebody wants to argue like the hardcore intricacies of like veganism, probably not going to get there. But for 99% of people I talk to, I think that my positions are perfectly coherent. I think they're perfectly consistent. I think they get it. The meat of like that particular conversation for abortion, like just fine. Like, is it going to do good enough for like professional like vegan debates? Probably not. But 99% of humanity is not at that point, so I don't care about it. It's not.
But it's not even professional because like it's like, and I know that Trent isn't like the average pro-lifer, but I mean we're talking about like he wasn't running like some fucking super complex shit. He was just saying why is it human and not consciousness. And then when it's sort of like you're caught between these two fucking places, man. To the point in which
I'm not. Hold on. To be clear, I'm not caught anywhere. I might be caught in servers where people are copy pasting 72 million like name the trait arguments or the 52,000
I
genetic
fucking hate
fallacies
name the
that like
trait.
me. Sure. Okay. I'm just saying that like I'm not caught anywhere. I think for the vast majority of people, I can have the conversation. The conversation will be fine. I'm sure there are hardcore analysis debate servers where people are hardcore teasing out the meta ethical positions of why veganism is like commanded by God in the Bible and whatnot. That's fine. I'm sure those
That
positions
would be
exist.
only
But I
me,
don't think.
but yes.
I don't think most people. I don't think I'm running into these problems mostly. If I start running into issues everywhere where people are like, oh, well, what about veganism? Then fine, fuck. Maybe I need to go back and reanalyze it. That's really going to be the position that most people are going to take. I'd be surprised if that was the case. But then maybe I would go back there. But I don't think that's going to be the case.
Well, okay. I'll just explicate what I think that my issue is then, and I'll just leave it be, right? I think that in terms of the category of human, and you've seen the category of consciousness, is essentially just it's like the reason you're saying consciousness is because you want to say that there is a value experience, and I get that. But when we talk about the even like when Tom mentioned, let's say, the evolution of the brain, where does sort of this human level of experience begin? Why is this experience valuable and that experience not valuable? That's where it all starts to like get so messy. Where I don't think, to be frank, I don't know where you're saying the value comes from. Vegan gains can go, well, all dogs have the same structures of the brain. You're saying it's still not having the same consciousness.
Where
It's
does the
like
value? Where does the value for sentience come from?
I would say from the experience of like value. I think it is a value experience. That's what it
Why?
is
Why?
by
But why?
definition.
Why would you
Because
value that in anything?
it's one of the
You
fact
can't
that
say
it's
by
more.
definition because you literally just said earlier my definition was circular. You're literally giving me a tautology right now. I define it as valuable, therefore it's valuable.
Well, no, I'm not saying I'm defining it as valuable. I'm saying that sentience is the value experience because that's what it is. That's what it's feeling something, right?
So
So that
why
means that
is the feeling that you have over a thing in your brain any different than the feeling of a plant that searches for the sun? Like
the
leaves will grow
plants
towards
don't
sunlight.
have a feeling. Plants aren't
How do you
conscious.
know?
They
What do you
don't have.
mean?
What do you mean? They don't have. We have absolutely zero reason to believe that plants are conscious. Like the
Why do you,
in like
wait,
look, you're the one
earlier
that references neuroscience.
you just said that like we can look at behaviors. The behavior of
Yeah,
like a cat moving towards the sun seems like it wants to be like warm. What about the behavior of plants growing towards sunlight, looking for
plants
energy?
plants grow towards sunlight in a way that's autonomous. An animal makes a behavioral distinction based upon competing values.
You
So
have
like
no
it's like
idea if that's true for a cat or dog. It could be literally just the same. Like
we have
this
exactly
stimulus
the
produces
same
this
reason.
effect.
We have exactly the same reason to believe it's true for a cat or dog as we do for another human.
No,
That's my
you
whole
don't.
point.
What do you
Yes,
mean?
we do. What's the
Why?
difference?
The difference is they're cats and dogs, and we're humans.
Right. Oh, okay. So, like, what the difference? What's the difference between a cat and a dog? Like a category? Like a fucking word? Like, what does that mean? Like,
Biologically, they're the structures of their bodies and the thoughts that they're capable of producing and the way that they're capable of socializing with each other are completely, totally different.
okay, yeah, they've got different social capabilities and they've got different biological standpoints. But why would that indicate one is conscious and one isn't in relation to humans being conscious and animals aren't?
I don't
Like,
know.
why
You're
would I
the one.
go?
I was just trying to get at what you were saying. It's you because you seem to come
Okay,
from this
I would
ground of
say
like
that
having
like
like an objective
no.
valuation of like sentient experience,
How
and
do we
then you're
understand
making fun
something's
of me for
conscious?
having like a subjective value. And I was like, I feel like at the end of the day, ultimately, it's all pretty subjective. Like I don't think this unless you're religious and you've got like some divine revelation or whatever. But I don't think you can say that like your position is any more objectively grounded in fact than any other
I
person's.
mean, I don't think. I think you could be a secular objectivist, like a moral realist. I don't think that you don't have to be a
Okay, well, if you're going to be a
But like
secular
that's
objectivist, then
that's separate
objectively,
to what we're
cooking
even
meat
talking
tastes
about. Like
good. So if there
you're
was
saying,
ever
like
secular objective moral values, then it must be that eating animals is good because they taste good when you cook them. Like if we're going to be secular objectivists.
no, that's not how that would work. Like you could say because like rape might feel good. That doesn't mean everyone should do it. Like but the thing is that like when we look at the like why we would say that a human is conscious and a dog is conscious or not conscious and then a plant is like not conscious and we look at like behavioral distinctions and like when neuroscientists do this in the first place they'll do it with these distinct categories in mind. The fact that they'll go, okay, this seems to have an internal experience which is mediating its environment, which seems to be like indicating problem solving capabilities, which seems to be reacting to external stimuli, and then learning from previous stimuli and moving towards new and more, better scenarios or
Would you say
avoiding
that like
pain,
our
like a cat.
fungus? Yeah, would you say that a fungus is like conscious using that definition?
A
Fungus
fungus
can solve.
doesn't have. Fungus can solve problems.
Yes.
How?
Isn't there isn't there like a decent bit of research that like I want to say the comparison that was if you put fungus in certain types of environments that they can actually grow to solve for pathfinding in algorithmic ways that I don't even know if we have computer systems that can do it yet. Fungus are incredibly huge, complicated organisms that are capable of doing a lot of.
And
Yeah,
are
there's like
capable of essentially modifying their behavior based upon non-reactive responses, where it's not just increased stimuli, path of easiest resistance, and instead shows like a consideration of various alternatives,
when you say
especially.
consideration, you're normatively loading stuff that might just happen normally. Like a rock might choose to flow one way or roll down a hill one way versus another, but it's just gravity acting upon it. The same way that a cat or a dog might choose to eat one
Well,
piece of
no,
food over
like
another, but just because there are neurons in their brain that are like driving them in that direction. It's all causal at the end of the day.
no. I mean, you can change. You can even control this. You can There's psychological experiments on animals which change certain neurological conditions, which, for example, pain receptivity, where they inhibit pain receptivity to demonstrate that an animal does experience pain. So you give an animal essentially a something which would stop pain receptivity and they stop responding to that stimuli and will continue to eat food even when it would normally be painful, or they'll be more willing to take certain actions in relation to, like, for example, I know Jordan Peterson loves to talk about this sort of weird shit where they'll give like essentially an animal a drug and it'll become more like a lobster a drug or some shit, and
Yeah,
it'll
all
become
you're
more
talking about
confident
are
and
it feels like all
abrasive.
you're talking about are changing the inputs of the equation here. So
In the
pushing the
same way
rock to
that
the
you
left
could,
or
the
right.
exact same way that you could say with a human. We're talking about a central nervous system. We're talking about it modifying its behavior in relation to an environment, in relation to a collective
Yeah, I'm
goal,
not
like it's an
asking you to compare the
organism.
difference between animals and humans. I'm just trying to figure out where does this objective value for
No,
animals
I'm
come from
saying like
over
no,
animals over like rocks or plants? Because you're the one
what we
that's
were
telling me that there's some objectively different answer.
No, but what I'm saying is that in terms of behavioral analysis for consciousness, we have exactly the same reason to say that an animal and a plant, sorry, an animal and a human is conscious. Like we have nothing. You said there is absolutely no difference. I'm just saying what would indicate the difference and where is it? Because all of language, for example, is going to be based on behavioral analysis. Like it's all going to be like, are you indicating a certain belief state within your actions in terms of its development? Like that's like a proposition is just a belief in which you're aware of, like you've become aware of your own beliefs. So it's like a level of self-awareness. So the belief had to pre-exist to form the linguistic structure in the first place, where you'd indicate. This is where like Wittgenstein would say like you start indicating like slab and the other person goes slab, and you just have the shared goal of like building something, and we'll start talking about semantics and shit. But for all of that semantics to even happen, you had to have a goal. You had to essentially have a belief state in relation to that goal, and then you're essentially engaged in a form of communication. So I'm just wondering why the fuck you'd go, oh, this animal here, this dog, cat, dolphin, chimpanzee, these are very complex social animals engaged in highly communicative behavior, seem to respond to their environment that shows problem solving skills, and neuroscientists all almost unanimously all say animals are conscious and having an experience. But then you'll go, not that experience. That's not the same kind. And you'll make this hard fucking distinction between them and us. And
Why
it
do you
just
think it's
sounds like it's
reasonable to
pseudo
assume?
religious.
Okay,
It's
it
pseudo.
is.
It's like a human soul, right? Like honestly, like a Christian will do it. They'll go, oh well, the lack of human soul, made in the image of God. Like that's like, do you know what I mean? That's how it seems to me.
Okay, maybe I'm making my way back to Catholicism then, you know?
No, I'm not saying you are. Like, I'm just wondering, like, because that's how I'm approaching it. Because, like, it seems to me that normally, if I was to give an evolutionary case, like 9 times out of 10, a neuroscientist or an evolutionary psychologist, an evolutionary biologist, they think we're the same thing as animals to a higher degree. It's not that there is this massive categorical distinction. Yet you want to make out, like, no, ethics starts here because there is this massive categorical distinction. And I want to know why.
I don't know, man. Just seems like humans are a thing. Where else do we want to go with this?
No, look, I'm not gonna fucking press you all night. Like, I appreciate you even just taking the time to talk to us, and you know, uh, like, I'm not gonna try and push this too hard, but it does just. All I would ask is that you reflect on why you consider one category valuable and the other category not, and whether this approach even aligns with an evolutionary biological take. Um, in the first place, because it seems like this approach to me seems evolutionarily counterintuitive. It seems just essentially, even in terms of the philosophy of mind and phenomenology, sort of arbitrary, where you're like, there's just a distinction. I don't know where it's coming from. So I'm just
Mhm.
wondering, like, why all of these like, maybe just consider that, maybe like maybe just work out why you're giving these experiences to humans but not to animals. Because if it does turn out that animals have these experiences and you've been killing them all along, and you say that you value these experiences, you're gonna, like, that's pretty fucking shit, right?
True.
Okay. Well, thank you for chatting with us anyways.
No problem, Tom. What do you got for us?
I mean, I still would like to understand it. Like, just take my position, okay? The we value humans because they're human. We're social animals. We like humans. We like to be around humans. We have sex with humans. We are able to talk to humans. Like, everything that we do is going to be with other humans. And it seems like chimps and bonobos and all other primates act similarly and value their own kind similarly. Why would that not be the case, that we're just valuing humans because they're humans?
Wait, are you asking perspective philosophy or me?
You.
Sorry, repeat that again.
If we're why aren't we just valuing humans because they're human? Like, we talk to humans, we have sex with humans, we engage with humans, we work with them. Bonobos, chimpanzees, so like all other primates seem to value their own kind just because it's their own kind. Why aren't we valuing our own kind just because it's our own kind?
I mean, fundamentally, maybe that is the argument, right? You're valuing humans value human conscious experience because we're humans that have conscious experiences like humans. That might be the case, maybe.
Sure. I have trouble with consciousness because I just don't even know if maybe I just don't understand it enough. But like, I feel like the fact that we build things, and like we can build buildings and talk and move our mouths completely different than any other animal. It seems like our consciousness is completely different from any other animal. Do you not believe that? Or perspective philosophy, where, like, how do you separate our consciousness from our intelligence?
I think intelligence has a causative effect on consciousness to the point in which we could say that the greater syntactic development in terms of like the application of like, categories of the understanding, so concepts, the application of concepts, which I would take to be like specific mental abilities. So when you apply a mental ability, like because of having a greater intellectual capacity, you're going to have a different experience, right? Or you're going to be able to sort of at least sort of take parts out of that experience and focus on them and develop them into new and varied experiences. But that doesn't mean that your experience of value has radically changed. It just means that you're capable of experiencing new and varied values. Like, you already had the valuation to then create these new categories in the first place. These are just different values where I do think humans have a richer, more complex, sophisticated experience than animals, typically. Maybe not dolphins and primates massively. I think they have pretty sophisticated experiences, but I think humans can, have infinite almost conceptual development. And it's just a matter of time before we get more and more sophisticated. But that doesn't mean that our evaluation of our experience was determined by it being structured a certain way. It was already being valued, which is why it is now structured that way, and why we're looking for these richer, more complex and sophisticated systems, which is why, as Christians or as Aristotelians, whatever, you could be an Aristotelian atheist, I don't really care. You would say that you're looking for flourishing, right? You're looking for this like sort of eudaimonic, rich, developed experience of maybe something like a million higher pleasure, where it's like actually like the experience of Shakespeare had gave me an experience of beauty. Like it's an artistic experience, which is amazing, but it's only because of our animalistic nature that we're capable of developing to these heights in the first place. Reason is important, but it can't do it alone. Consciousness plays a vital role in this, and without the category of animality, humans can't be understood. The genus of animality contains the species of humanity, and so there's no reason to think that we would have any understanding of human consciousness without first attributing base animalistic indications of pleasure, pain in relation to really narrow or really sort of simple categories of categorical relationships to our environment, like heat, sensitivity, all of
Sure,
the
but
basic
that doesn't
senses.
make sense because we can actually experience the things, like more things than animals. It's not
Yeah.
just like the understanding of
I'll be
it.
back 1 second.
Like, understanding the thing is part of the experience, like being able to understand science, the fact that we can even like know where earth came from and how it got here. We can
Okay.
understand evolution, like
Yeah.
that is part of the experience. I don't think that you can completely separate the intelligence from
I don't think it's
the
part of the. I don't think it's
consciousness.
not part of the experience. Like, of course not. Like, I don't think. I think what makes us human is having this rational capacity, and that's. I mean, that's like when Destiny, for example, talks about this idea of human consciousness. I don't actually think he even means human quote unquote consciousness. I think he means rational consciousness. And I think, for example, if we were to come into contact with an alien who was very similar to us, I doubt Destiny's going to be like, that doesn't matter. It does matter to him because he's saying that it has this sort of rich conscious experience. What I'm calling into question is, where does the value of this rich conscious experience come from? Or why are we even seeking these rich experiences? They're not for their own sake, they're for our sake as essentially a united being. It's because we care about our experiences. It's not that we care about a specific experience of beauty or redness or whatever, because it doesn't even make sense unless it's placed into the sort of life of an animal. Like, unless I go like, actually, I'm having a conscious experience of the world, and during that conscious experience, one thing feels good, one thing feels bad, and now we can sort of put these things together in more and more complex ways, and we have, Mozart or some shit. Like, that's essentially what a human experience is. It's just a more complicated animal experience. The value was already present. We're just expressing the value in a different way.
Well, the value is subjective, though. I don't know what you mean about the value.
Like, the subject is the value. It's like, there's a guy called Tom Regan, and he argues that, and he's a Kantian, right? How do we understand the value of a specific end? Like, an end is, or like, let's say pleasure, pain, whatever. It's in relation to a goal, essentially, like end setting. It is a rational categorization, but it's a categorization based upon the unified experience of a subject. So like, a subject having an experience is what is valuable. Like, the experience, if you remove the experiencer, is meaningless. Like, it doesn't, not only is it incoherent, but it doesn't have any value there. Like, redness in a vacuum isn't anything. Redness on a rose when someone is looking upon it and having a reaction to it is what is valuable. It's not in the redness, in the rose, in the object. It's in you. You are the value that's being expressed, not the experience itself. It's why I don't like consequentialism, because I think consequences are conditioned from the subject and not the other way around.
Yeah, I completely disagree with that. I think that we decide what it is that we value. We choose what it is that we value, especially within, like, morals are only there because we decided that they were beneficial to us within a society. So we're
right.
creating a
Why?
society
How did we decide that?
by engaging in societies and testing what
So
works and
why
what
did
was
we
actually
one?
beneficial.
Why did we engage in society? And two, like,
Because it was beneficial.
how was it beneficial's a moral term, right?
Yes, like, meaning that we were happier working together, each person doing their
Oh
own
yeah.
job, each person taking part within a society and acting as a cog within the system. Each, like, it just happened to be more beneficial
So
for us all to engage
so
within a
if it
society.
was more beneficial, so if it was more good, because beneficial just means resulting in good, favorable, advantageous. So if it was more good for us to live in society, doesn't that mean that the good existed before society?
No, it means that our subjective value, like, that is one thing that we subjectively value. There could be something better that we happen to value more. There's just something there that we actually enjoy. Like, we have better
So it's not
quality of
society now, it's
life.
subjective. So it's not society it comes from the subject.
Well, I'm saying that we value society because of the subject.
Okay, so why does the subject value, like, so where does how does the subject determine what it values?
Um, I don't know that I can actually answer that. That it's
So
just
I
based
think
on.
there's two real ways to work this out in terms of how the self comes around in terms of our values. I think you can take a Humean way of going around it and saying it's from the passions, that we are given values based on um, non-cognitive natural stimuli, right?
Sure, the values are there. Well, so that is what I would say, is that there is something within our brain that is stimulated based on certain circumstances, and so we just happen to value those things because our brains are stimulated. But that doesn't mean that there's not something else that would stimulate our
Is
brains
there
more.
Okay, and is that done in a way that does it conform to a nature or anything, or is it just sort of arbitrary?
it is, well, our brains are natural, so it would be nature.
So one, this we're not choosing our values now. We are being given them by nature. I'd like to point out. And two, if they aren't arbitrary and like they're not just sort of random, then they have a specific end, which means that all subjects
Hold
all
on.
have a
I don't like
specific
the way
end.
you said that. Like, I can choose to eat a steak or macaroni and cheese. Both of them are going to stimulate my brain, but that doesn't mean that both of them have the same value to me. Like, I can like one at times, and I can like the other at times. There's not this objective value to either one of them.
But the objective value is whether you're like this is the distinction between egoism and psychological egoism and subjectivism. A subjectivist is going to say that the value is based on either like a non-cognitive expression which pre-exists, which is sort of either arbitrary or like is sort of happening to me. It's not necessarily valuable to me, and there's no way I can really gain a sort of moral generalism to the point in which it's a moral realism about this. And the psychological egoist or the moral egoist is going to say there is actually a way in which I can work out what is good or bad for me, and that's what's good in general, right? From a individual standpoint, I don't get to choose that. It comes pre-packaged with my nature, but it is objective. Like I might think taking heroin is good, but I might be wrong. I might be so wrong. I might ruin my life. I might hate it. That's
Yeah, but
that's
why
the
do we
distinction.
allow you to make a decision as an individual?
Because your reasoning is based around not just
Yeah,
your
but society could choose to not allow you to make decisions as an individual. We could do what only benefits society and have you just do the
I
things
mean
that
that
benefit
okay, that doesn't
society.
even make sense. How would society work out what benefited it if it didn't rely upon the individual reasons who occupy society? Like the whole point is that
No,
you are an
that is my point though, is that we only allow the individual. Let's see. It is beneficial to society to grade things on an individualistic level. So, like, grading each person on individualistic actions and saying whether or not they are doing something right or wrong, that is beneficial to society. That's why we do it on an individualistic level. Not just
I
because.
think there is a value to the individual. Like I'm not arguing against the value to the individual. What I'm arguing against is one, subjectivism, which I've killed at this point, and now I'm arguing against moral egoism. And the moral egoistic standpoint relies upon not the just the individual, because really you could turn this around, right? And this is what I will do. But the moral egoist basically affirms that they have an intimate and already pre-exposed conception of themselves. Like they know what is good for them and they have access to it. Now, likewise, I would say, are there times when an individual is wrong in relation to themselves, like that heroin addict, and has not acted in such a way as to reflect their own good?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't even feel like you engaged with what I just said. Like there's movies where they show people all being told exactly what they do, what their jobs are going to be, exactly where to go and how to act, what to eat. Like they could
I
make
don't
all of
want
these
people
decisions
to be,
for them. I don't want that
yeah,
either, but that's the point, is
I
that
don't
we
think that makes
do
sense.
happen to do this based on an individualistic level because we think of ourselves as individuals.
Look, I'm an individualist, right? And I think that the human reason necessarily includes, like the consideration of the collective reasoning includes the individual, as in and this is basically the point of going like when I make a judgment about myself and others, does it have value? If it doesn't have value, then this is a tyranny. And in a tyrannical situation, then we're relying upon the reasoning of one person, which is not also more likely to be flawed, but is essentially going to be based around uh, and alienating all of the evidence and value of another person's experience. And so it is necessarily going to be irrational. That's why I don't like tyrannies, because they're irrational. If you had, like, if you could imagine there was a system of governance which stepped in only when you did something necessarily irrational, and it was 100% accurate every time. Like, for example, a god. for example, who went, "Do not do this thing. It's going to mess you up." And in this specific instance, like he's told you time and time again, do not do this thing, it's going to mess you up. Now, he can either let you do it or he can stop you. Now, if let's say you're doing it not because you're like willfully disobedient, or it's because you just don't understand what you're doing, right? Should he should he correct your behavior? Should he, I don't know, send someone hypothetically to correct your behavior, tell you you're doing the wrong thing, explain that it's wrong, and try to convince you otherwise? Or impede, or even like more drastically, impede upon your free will in a situation. Well, impede upon your volition to reflect your free will, to reflect your reasoning. Do you think that would be justified?
No, I would, but I've already explained why I think that we engage as individuals. It's not, I don't think it's just because of the ego, but because that's what's like beneficial to society. Like
You say beneficial to society, but you think that's the ego, man. So I don't know.
No, I'm saying that we have egos. Just because we have an ego doesn't mean that that's necessarily why society decides to grade things as an individual. Like that,
So
we a lot
where
of
do you
this
think?
came through like liberalism and the Enlightenment period and crap like that. Like it wasn't like we always, looked at things the way that we do today.
I mean, yeah, but I mean, like, look at the egoism from the whole point of the egoism from the Enlightenment period was to boil us down to animals making decisions in relation to a passionate nature. So, like, the egoists are like the closest allies you're gonna have, apart from the subjectivists. But you argued against subjectivism before. You said like, no, there is a nature. So if there's a nature, then it's, and I'm assuming you're saying it's particular, then you're an
Well,
egoist. Like that's I don't know what
no,
to tell you. Like,
I didn't, because I explained that like I can sometimes I want steak, sometimes I want macaroni. Like both are going to give me stimulus, but that doesn't mean that like if one gives me more stimulus, it's objectively better, because I'll still choose to eat macaroni other times. Like it's not I don't think that
right.
there's this like
So,
objective good in one or the
but
other,
why are you
because I can still make the decision between both of them.
why are you making the decision? Because I'm assuming we're boiling this down to the passions. It's going to end up being passions are making the decision, right? So why
Yeah,
are you making the decision?
it it does, it depends on the moment. Sometimes I'll choose one thing, sometimes I'll choose the other. Like I don't know, it is just subjective. Like I don't know that I can boil it down any more than that. Because from what you're saying, it's as though I'm going to choose steak literally every time. I'm going to choose steak literally
No,
every
of
time because
course
it
not.
gives me more stimulus.
I think you're going to ask yourself the question. You're going to go, all right. I ate steak like twice this week. I'm not really feeling it right now in relation to like what I've already ate or what I'm fancying. And so you're making a rational decision and you're ordering your desires in relation to reason, right? And I would like to point out like this isn't. I haven't even like. There's a point of going that not only would all none of these desires be like if we just say that they're irrationally prepackaged and you just sort of feel you're not making a decision, it just happens and you remove all human volition. So I'm assuming that you are going to make some sort of rational decision in relation to what you feel. And that's going to be based around like a holistic experience of a human life. You want to live a good life. Eating the macaroni this time will let you live a better life rather than the steak. Like, it's pretty much that. That's the difference between egoism and subjectivism. But look, like in this respect as well. Like, I think that there's worth saying. Like, I think you said to Destiny, and I think it's kind of funny because you said to Destiny, why don't you value the category of human, right? And why do you just value human consciousness? Yet when we're talking about ethics, we're boiling all of this down to feeling. And it all boils down to feeling. It doesn't boil down to abstract rational categories, right? That an objectivist would say. It boils down to how do you feel? So I'm like, would it not even make more sense in relation to your position to be more like Destiny, where you value human consciousness and the experiences of conscious people, because whether it's for pragmatic use or something like Destiny says, or like what he feels about it, like why would you value, I don't know, like the rational like the category of human?
I don't know that I can separate why I would value humans from any other animal, outside of the fact that, like, because I think consciousness in and of itself isn't going to be enough. There's the intelligence, there's the social factors, there's like a ton of other things outside of just consciousness that I think that we value in those scenarios.
I think that in
And
relation to your system, there is only one thing you value, and that's your experiences. And that all of this is built up of a complex, sophisticated attribution of how you think you're going to feel about something, right? So all of this, it's not that you value humans, it's not that you value any specific category, it's that it would make you feel a certain way, and that's what it boils down to. So that's like unless you're saying it doesn't, unless you're saying there is something else, there is some other reason as to why one should value a category of human, or why you even think you could value that category. The only thing I'm getting from you is that you have a passionate response. That passionate response relates to how you feel, and ultimately you feel a certain way about a zygote, and Destiny doesn't. So when you say like, why does he feel that way about human consciousness? Because for the same reason that you don't feel that way towards animals, but you feel it about that collection of cells, he doesn't feel it in relation to a human zygote, but does to a conscious experiential agent.
Well, real quick, Steven, I know you gotta go soon, so I'm not gonna make you sit through this. I appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah, what's up?
I was saying if you need to go, you can hop out. I know you said you
Oh,
had
I
to
probably got
leave.
like 5 or 10 more minutes, so yeah,
Okay.
go for it.
Okay. So the I like I said, I think it's going to be too complicated. I think it's going to be like I think it's going to be something essential to just being human, that we value other humans. Just as, like, I don't think we could explain exactly why a chimpanzee values other chimpanzees, or why they hang around other chimpanzees. I don't think that we would put it down to like their consciousness. I think that would be a little bit too simplistic. Like there's something that automatically makes them engage with one another as soon as they're born. So it's I think you're oversimplifying it to just say that it's only the consciousness.
Is that to me or to
Yeah,
Destiny?
you're
There,
the one who's saying that that's what I ought
right.
to
Okay.
value, and so I'm explaining like why I wouldn't. I
I
think
think
that
that
because even just like rationalizing things as well, like I think that that's
I think
going
that
to
yeah, but like
change.
look, the whole point is that what you're saying is that in terms of your rationalizing, it's just based off how you feel about your passions. So like chimpanzees do the same thing, right? Like in terms of building communities, like in terms of rationally categorizing, like these categories are that you're building are just categories of how you feel. In the same way, like don't get me wrong, I think that like I'll happily argue for a moral realist stance. I just don't think that your stance can call Destiny into question at all. That's what I'm pointing out. So like I like Destiny, I think Brent's stance probably could, because Brent was basically arguing for a Catholic stance, which means his thinking of what something is right or wrong is beside the point. One, it's objective, even secularly, or or two, it's God. So like the way that he's going to approach it is objective. Like there isn't like there is a right and wrong. It's not about how you feel. What I'm saying is that if this is all about how you feel, this is all a complex bullshit game. In which
Are
we
you doing
essentially,
the like it's subjective, therefore like it can just be anything?
I'm saying it's subjective, so it's subjective. Like you have one subject and you have another, and if they feel differently, then they feel differently, right? And I don't even think it works out in the end. I think subjectivism falls apart. I
Yeah,
think
but
that the
we can
subject,
rationalize and make arguments for one over the other. Like just because it's subjective doesn't mean that it's all exactly the
the
same.
rationalizing is ad hoc based on your own already preconceived preferences, based on things which you can't control. That's that definitionally non-cognitive. Or it's something you can control, and you have to explain to me where it comes from.
Well,
And you
no,
just said
I
your
don't.
passions.
No. I don't think that I can explain. Why we value something is different than me trying to explain why we value that thing. Like, one way or the other, Destiny and I both value humans. We're both just trying to rationalize why one values, or why one believes we value them differently than the other. Yes, it is all post hoc, obviously, but that doesn't mean that we're valuing different things. We're just trying to explain why
No,
we value.
you are
Like,
valuing different things, because it's not that you actually value the thing, you value your experience of a thing. That's the whole subjectivist spiel. It's an expression of your own emotional states. It's necessarily separate to him. Like, and also it was it's Trent, not Brent. I'm sorry, sorry I did that. But like the like it's his emotions are separate to your emotions. If you're saying that you're a moral subjectivist or even an egoist, he can basically just tell you to fuck off. That's basically that's the end of it. The only thing that you could do otherwise is appeal to his specific emotional states, where you go, well, don't you think you feel this way, maybe? Or would it not be advantageous for you to agree with me? Because anything else is essentially you just trying to impose what you consider valuable onto another subject, which is either going to be a category error for a subjectivist, or well, actually, yeah, it's just a category error, or a form of prescriptivism where you're actually trying to psychologically manipulate them in order to gain your own end, and so you're just using destiny as a way to try and forward your own emotional states. That's kind of it, right? That's it. So yeah, and
if we're both
I
looking,
think,
we're not just talking about ourselves, though. Like, you're talking about it in terms of egoism, as though we're saying, I value this, and I'm trying to explain why I value this. Whereas we're
well,
not. We're talking about why humans value humans.
well, I don't think that you Destiny. Do you talk about all humans valuing humans when you talk about why you value human consciousness?
I'm usually just trying to get at where are our moral intuitions pointing, and why do we value the things we do? Like where do they point to, basically? Yeah, not the
Yeah, that's the
whys.
same thing.
We just do. I don't think there is a why.
Right. You don't think there is a why, so it just boils down to how you feel.
Yeah, and then I make the assumption that other humans probably share the same intuitions. Hopefully.
Right. And if, let's say, they absolutely didn't, is there anything you can do about it?
Yep. Kill them.
Okay. Are you going to kill him, Tom?
I
I think
mean,
you
if
have
they're
to. I
not
think if there are
capable of
certain humans,
reciprocating morals, then
if there
yeah,
are
you
certain
don't
humans
have much of a choice.
yeah, there are certain humans that don't like reciprocate certain like feelings or don't have similar intuitions. Like if somebody has the intuition that murder or rape is good, then yeah, you have to remove them somehow, right? Either kill them or
So,
lock them away or
yeah,
exile them.
so it's just an ego relation. You're trying to either use them as a means to your end, in which case this is all essentially either a threat of a show of force at the bottom, or it's, I'm going to try and convince you feel differently. So
But
that's it.
that's the same as just existing within a society in the first place. Like, yes, we all
No,
want.
no, it's not. I would go so far as to say that I think that all of this is absolutely nonsense. I think the conception of like you value something and you have intimate knowledge of that is absolutely nonsense, because it doesn't even reflect how human psychology develops, or even how psychology develops in terms of group interrelations in the first place. The reason that, like, the way in which you develop what is positive or negative in relation to your life is based around how you understand yourself, which is based off a group conception of the self, which you've internalized. So no, I wouldn't make this all subjective. I think
You're
that's a
doing
load of
the
nonsense.
words like group subject. First of all, no one said any of this is subjective. I don't think.
He
Unless
did.
by subjective you mean just like the subjects looking at things, which is a way that I don't think either of us are
Yes.
using subjective. But the just because it's, I don't know if it's arbitrary or random, just because a group of people all tend to share the same intuitions.
Well, unless, are you, like, I asked, like, is this boiling down to like a sort of rational categorization, or is this just how we feel? Right? If this is just
I
how
think at
we
the end of the
feel,
day, it's how we feel. The rationalization will come afterwards.
right? So
I make
there's
a
only two
comparison
ways.
to like music theory. Like you can't use music theory to make somebody hear things a different way. You would just use it to explain why we hear the things that we do. I think morality is the same way.
But then, like, unless you're saying that there is a specific moral sense, and this is like a form of intuitionism, in which case neither of you are subjectivists. It's a non-natural, um, like a non-naturalist objectivist, where you're like, no, don't you see there is goodness there? And then when someone doesn't see it, you're like, oh, we've got a broken one. Like, you're not like, it's not that there isn't actually goodness there. Like, you'd be saying that no, human conscious is consciousness is objectively valuable, and it doesn't matter how I feel. But it sounds like both of you want to go, I feel a certain way, and based off those feelings, we talk about it, and if we don't agree, we'll murder each other. Like or at the very extremes, anyway. Because that's what. So it's either an egoistic take where
I mean,
you
what
have
you've
intimate
just
knowledge.
described is basically the history of the world, right?
No, I don't think so. I think that we have levels of cooperation. I think we have
I'm sorry, is
sophisticated.
not the history of the world people with dissimilar views on how the world should be ran constantly fighting and murdering each other?
No, I think diplomacy has existed for, well, since, I think you see diplomacy even in animality. I think like even like you get like for example, like look at when nearest relatives like bonobos. Bonobos mediate most of their conflicts with sex.
Yeah.
Humans are incredibly erotic in the same way. We mediate conflicts through marriage and through sexual relations and through group politics, and we don't necessarily, if anything, it seems that we seek to avoid needlessly killing each other. Like we have compassion and care for each other. Like
How do we have
in
how do we not have just one but two different world wars then?
I think
Yeah,
that
and
people
even
can
before,
become.
like, different tribes fought against each other and killed each other, which is why earlier when we were talking about whether or not I value all humans, I was saying, no, I value the humans around me, but I don't value all humans. Like, I just want the rights that, I want rights extended to the people around me, so I'm going to extend them to other people because other people care about those people. But I obviously don't care about all humans. I don't value all humans.
I think I think that like if you don't value all humans, like talking about like zygotes and stuff and valuing them, I think's mad. Like to be honest, like if you can't even value another walking,
It's
talking
the same
person
as
because
what
they
I was
speak
talking about a
Chinese,
second ago. I
like,
want it.
but
I
like,
want the value to extend to them just as it does to anybody else. It's the
right,
same
yeah,
argument.
but why would you? So like,
Stop.
you think like the what?
I think the
Sorry.
reason why the value extends is because intuitively you wouldn't typically value, but our tribes have gotten larger and larger and larger as time goes on. My
Hmm.
guess is that initially humankind probably didn't value other humans. You just valued the people in your tribe. That's why
Hmm.
you warred with each other. That's why you attacked and killed and stole and enslaved other people. But as time has gone on and we formed larger and larger social networks, the people that are considered part of our tribe has gotten larger. In the past, it might have just been the Bonnells, and then after that, maybe the Bonnell patriarchy, and then after that, small groups, then states, then nations, then collections of nations. Like the tribes are just growing bigger and bigger and bigger.
But we're
I think
rationalizing all of
what
that. Like at the
no, you
point
see,
where
like
it's outside of somebody that I actually can engage with and actually value,
I don't
I
even
start
think
to
that any of this
rationalize it at
makes
that
sense.
point.
I don't think any of this makes sense. We would see a shit ton more of tyranny, slavery. We certainly wouldn't be talking about human rights. We wouldn't be talking about any of that.
Yeah, but all of the
Especially
human rights stuff is incredibly unnatural. It's needed like meta organization to
Hmm.
enforce and enshrine that, right?
no, but
Humans
like
themselves don't naturally do these things. We have like institutions now that we've
yeah,
entrusted with
but
power.
that's, I mean, like, look, I mean, like, I think where institutions are a natural development. Like, I think humans are always going to develop institutions. Like, I think that the man by nature is political, right? Like, the
That's
reason
great.
that
That's great that you think that, but it took like 300,000 years for us to get there. So that's a pretty
yeah, I
bold
mean,
claim. Not only is
yeah,
it
I
a
mean,
bold claim, I would say that it's probably not even true. There's probably a higher likelihood that we'll nuke each other out of existence and then in 1,000 years go back to the warring tribes that we had 10,000 years ago. Like right now, as meta organization exists right now, this is a blip in Homo sapien history. And it took us a
even for
long
the
time to get here.
even for the fact, like, look, like we create these categories. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I agree that human history's been, a bloody adventure. But like, the development of our consciousness isn't just an arbitrary point in which we've only seek to express our own value in relation to each other. Like, when we care about human rights violations in other nations, it's not because it's a social contractual arrangement. It's because it is a universal right in which we extend in general, because we think that it
No.
constitutes a part of our being.
We
and
don't
and not
extend that
only
in
that,
general, though. It has
we
to be shoved in front of our face for it to be extended. Otherwise, we utilize child labor, we exploit other countries, we do all sorts of horrible things that it's
I
not
don't
right
I don't
for us.
think I don't think that's actually the case. I think that in terms of our ethics and our morality in general, I think that we would
I think
largely
you
be
can
like,
make
for
a
example,
vegan
like look
you can
at
make a
like
vegan
this,
argument for
like
this. How many
I,
people eat meat that wouldn't kill a cow?
but the
Hmm.
fact that anyone would go vegan in the first place when it clearly has no benefit to you in terms of having some sort of egoistic
Of course, there's benefit.
self-satisfaction.
Some people
What?
watch a PETA video and they get traumatized. They don't want to eat meat anymore. Other people have groups of friends that might pressure them to it. Other people feel like they collect social validation for going
You could
vegan.
just avoid, like, do what most people do, avoid the footage, and pretend it doesn't happen and
Most people
continue.
do avoid the footage, but there are some people I've talked to who have seen footage. I know people that have horrible fucking diets that are vegans today, but they were so traumatized with vegan shit when they were 9 years old. They're just like, I don't think I can eat like animals anymore. Like
And
it
not
happens.
just
A lot of
that,
people avoid it, I
there's like
agree,
I
a,
don't think that
not just that,
like
there's a
there.
social value to it as well, like being able to feel like you're righteous and you're doing the right thing and being able to tell others that you're doing the right thing. Like there's a lot of
Even
different
your
aspects to
consideration of
why you
what
would
do you
do
even
it.
mean by righteous in the first place? Like when we talk about these like sort of right, like these virtues like righteousness, piety, honesty, like the why we even value any of these in the first place. Like unless you're saying that it's all essentially socially manipulative or essentially a way to convince yourself of something that doesn't exist. Like I'm just unconvinced by that, and I'm not even like, to be fair, I think that all of this is ultimately bullshit anyway. I think in terms of even how we could understand ourselves, we are mutually dependent. It's not like when the reason these universal structures develop in the first place is because language itself is a collection of universals. Nouns apply to experiences through time. That's why when we talk about something like psychology, and we talk about I, and we're talking about like the self, we'll relate it to like the first person experience. But the way that the first person experience is unified is through a universal noun, which applies to all of our experiences. It's not like I particularized my experience and from that particular experience just sort of group things together. The particular itself relies upon this internalized universal construct. That's why like you can't like when I say like I'm British, it's not like I've just sort of grew up in this area. It's that I've acclimated social constructs and social development, which is essentially the recognition of other people's experiences and what is good and bad, correct and incorrect, essentially epistemologically, even if you don't think it's, meta, like ontologically, I'd say you have to, but whatever, is it's objective. It's not something that can be subjectively organized. Like all of these values or even the values of yourself in relation to why you care about these categories. You didn't think of these fucking categories. You were given to them as a baby. You think in a way in which somebody else made you think in terms of how you've been developed and raised and exposed to these concepts. And these concepts have formed you a real objective psychology, like not some sort of passionate and dispassionate blob that goes through life just sort of reacting to stimuli.
You say that
Like, because
somebody
then
else
you're not.
gave us the categories, though. Like, are you saying that we're socialized into an objective nature? Like, what it? I don't understand how you
I
can
think
believe
I
both
think
of those things.
socialization. I would go so far as to say that your the reason that you would even enter into sociality shows that there is a, like as you said, society is beneficial. There is
Hmm.
something valuable to you that drew you to society. And in society, we're in the process of trying to understand what that value is and work out its nuances.
But it is
Wow.
post hoc. Like, we are post hoc, like
It is
rationalizing it and figuring out
no,
why we
it
did it.
is what you are. It's not like post hoc rationalizing. It's you were probably doing it. Like you could imagine two cavemen like going in entering into a mutually beneficial relationship based around a belief of how it would relate to themselves. But the radically new thing out of this relationship is they could both realize they were entirely wrong, and that what either of them want can't be defined by either side. Like the whole point is that, like, this is basically where I'd recommend everyone check out Hegel's master slave dialectic, or like even like basically and explain like the concept of mutual recognition. You as a psychology, as a definitive identity, can only understand yourself as an individual because you reject a part of your particularity and you embrace a social common good. You accept your being a member of a species, of a universal. And that's what's been growing over time. Where we see, like, we had a tribe, that was where universal species. Then
But
we
there
had
are
a
kids in
city.
Africa
And
that are
then,
being
yeah.
socialized into fighting revolutions and killing all sorts of people. And
Yes. And
Wait, and
I will,
also, I love you
I'll,
guys, but I have to take off soon, so it's been fun.
yeah, that's
yep.
absolutely
All
fine.
right.
And
Thanks,
thank you for
Dustin.
the
Yeah.
conversation, man.
Be careful, guys. Bye.
Have a good one.
Bye. Like, yeah, like the way I see it, mate, is that in the end, like these kids are being socialized into, let's say, that horrific scenario. But the reason we say it's horrific isn't just some sort of um arbitrary criteria that we've all like, oh, I don't like the sound of that. It's that we think that there is a direct harm being done to those individuals, where we're like, this is psychologically the worst scenario for them. Even if they say they're having a blast, we would go, no, that is bad for you based on your nature. That's the difference.
Hmm. Like, I agree to some extent. Like, I've said a bunch of times, like, if all of us were psychopaths, like, society would obviously look very differently. Like, um, we build society to fit what it is that we want as humans. But I I think that we're all just post hoc rationalizing that afterwards. I don't think we knew what we were doing at the time, and I think that we're looking back at it now that we have science and psychology and history and all of these things. We're trying to figure out why it is that we did these things and what value is actually there, and if we can like re-evaluate the entire thing and build it differently uh and in
But
a
like, look at it
way
like
that's
this. Why
actually
would
has
we
more
have
utility.
like look at it like this? Even in our consideration of utility, which is a universal word which relates to us all and tries to encapsulate like a universal common good, right? Like the reason, like look at it. Why did we engage? Like the reason we engage in something being like in terms of understanding ourselves in the first place, these sort of epistemic adventures, right? Science, biology, like, well, like not like biology, history, physics, chemistry, philosophy, theology, whatever, right? Like the reason we engage in that is to understand aspects of ourselves. We aren't like post hoc analyzing it. Like to say that we're post hoc analyzing it implies that we're looking for something that wasn't there. The reason that we've engaged in this adventure can only be
Wait, hold on,
understood
hold
because
on,
there was
wait,
something.
hold on. I'm not understanding. Okay, so when I say post hoc analyzing it, I'm saying that there might have, like, we might have done something naturally, but after we did it, we're looking back trying to figure out why we did it and trying to figure out what those values were. What do you mean when you're saying post hoc
I don't
analyzing
think
it?
we're looking for the values that a specific agent has. I think that we discover new values and develop new ways of understanding ourselves in society. Like what we are learning is our nature. We're not learning about the intentions of a specific individual. Like that's impossible to even
Yeah,
know.
to some extent,
Like
yeah. A lot of it, that's what I'm saying, is that we may have naturally have done this, and so when we post hoc analyze it, we're trying to understand our own nature.
right. Right. So if you think that it's a nature though, man, like if this isn't subjective, this isn't something like yeah, like we are subjects, but we are subjects trying to
Well, some
understand our
people are
objective
psychopaths
subjectivity.
and may not value the things in the same way that I do,
But
so it's
but
obviously
in the same
subjective to some extent.
in in the same ways, you know when you said a universal category before and you brought up humanity and you're saying you value humanity, like the point would be more to say that you only value in a certain way because of your humanity. That these universal constructs, this linguistic, this language that you've been raised in has like forms a psychology to the
Hmm.
point in which once you reject all social bonds and all bonds of fellowship, you know, like that sort of thing, you're rejecting rationality itself, where you can't even conceive of yourself in a way in which you don't just assume what is good for you, which means you've lost access to all of that epistemological benefit,
Yeah,
which
see, I
means that,
don't even know what you mean when you say rationality now, because yeah, to me, we like rationality is something we constructed to categorize our own thoughts and analyze them. So I'm not.
yeah, but like
What
look
do
at it
you,
like this. Why do you categorize your own thoughts? Like why do you want to categorize your own thoughts?
to understand them and to analyze
Why
them,
do you want to
and
understand them?
because it helps me with future
Because you don't
thoughts.
you don't know enough about yourself. You need that, right? To understand yourself. You need these categories. You need that to gain knowledge of yourself, to analyze yourself, to understand what is good for you.
But the reason I
What
would want to understand myself is for future decisions, for future rational decisions.
even to say like the reason that you'd want to like the funny thing is, even the reason that you would say you want rationality is bought out of your sort of gained rationality, these categories, right? Like
Say that
it's
again.
you're motivated towards pleasure or pain or what or avoidance of pain or whatever. And
Yeah,
in that, you've engaged and developed rational structures. One of those rational structures is essentially an identity which is consistent and understandable through time. So that you
yeah,
can
well,
imagine yourself throughout your whole life.
because again, I'm going to value. Sometimes I'll value some pain for other stimuli. Like I might go play football, and I'm going to be in a lot of pain afterwards, but I enjoy the crowds cheering for me. I enjoy like everybody, jumping up and down and being happy when I catch the ball. Lots of other people just don't want to be in pain at all, so they're not going to choose to play football whatsoever.
Yes, but like for example, we would say that people who avoid like we would often say something like people who avoid all forms of pain, like there are real goods of football. Like I wouldn't say that that's not a thing. It's not necessarily everyone has to do those goods or that it's good for everyone, but that there are real achievable goods for certain people, and you can understand yourself in relation to those goods through rational categorization,
There
right?
are, but
Which
that's what I'm saying is that we're valuing some goods over others. We're choosing some goods over others.
I agree, but it's not based off just it's like you don't go like when you work out what you're going to do with your life, it's not like the whole point is to say that how you understand those goods in the first place is the category. Like you wouldn't have understood the good of football. You
I
wouldn't have
agree.
had the good of
Yeah,
football
I agree.
if
Like we
you
have to have the category in order to understand it first. Like we
right.
have to have
The
a category and a label in order for us to engage with it.
right. And then this is basically what Kant's going to say. He's going to say those categories are not if you're saying that those categories are what is valuable, then the overall end isn't that it can boil down to this sort of subjective experience and this pleasure, because even to understand or conceive or have that pleasure, you've categorized it. That's the point I'm saying. All of these goods that you value come from a construct which is separate from your specific pains and pleasures. It's
Well,
a
hold on.
construct which is, it
'Cause-
includes them, but it's not only yours.
So when I say okay, damn, there's a lot more there. So when I say we're categorizing it, I'm saying there's not necessarily something there. We're just choosing to categorize it that way because we at least acknowledge a pattern of something that we feel like we can categorize so that we can communicate it. But it's not necessarily separate from another thing. Like what I get stimuli from, I might start to notice a pattern of stimuli from a specific type of thing, but I don't always get stimuli from that thing, meaning
So
that
you don't
I've
think that like
categorized it, but it's not necessarily how I categorized it. That's what's giving me the stimuli.
you see, I think that like don't get me wrong, I don't think it's just how you've experienced, right? Like that's what I'd say your animality, right? But the fact that like for example, if I was to basically put neurons like was it like metal rods in your skull, right, through your brain and trigger a pleasure response. Let's say I release what is it like endorphins, right? Dopamine and endorphins that you get the same amount that you get from running around on a pitch playing football. Is that the same? Do you think that would be the same experience overall as running around on a pitch and playing football? Be the same? Like,
No.
are you having no? So it can't just boil down to the pleasure. It boils down as much to the categories, which are not subjective.
You're saying the
It
categories are not subjective?
no, the categories are rational. They're objective. Like this is where you'd start saying like you could at best argue maybe for um a form of cultural relativism. But at that point I'm just going to say like, well, why did culture form this? Why did humans form this? And it's going to be like essentially show that reason is in relation to our nature. So we are like rational animals and we are
Yeah.
trying to create the best possible experiences for ourselves. And that forms us into a universal structure where we consider this is where Aristotle would say the life of the good life for me becomes the good life for man. Um, yes, I am trying to find my own good, but in that I'm drawn towards what is our good. What is the common good? How should I understand myself? And I'll gain radically new ways of engaging with myself
When
to
you
the point
say
in which I
that,
can play football and
I
engage in
don't.
politics. And
Okay, I'm not even understanding what you mean by that. So, are you saying that because something is good for you, it's likely good for humanity, and if something's good for humanity, it's likely good for you as well?
I'm saying that the way in which we can understand good and bad in the first place is a categorical structure, meaning that it is not something which is based on your own sort of hypothesis alone, but based on a universal consideration of self. Like you construct with other people in relation of judgment, like what is good for me, people, humans, British people, whatever. And these categories are tested against your experience and tested against our experiences. And they form our experiences in many ways. Um, that's the point I'm arguing. It's not a subjective thing. It's, as I said, you could at best argue it's a socio-cultural thing, like a political, like a culturally relativistic thing, which is why everyone seems to care about the same
Again, when I
stuff.
say it's
Um,
subjective, I'm not saying that there's not some sort of value there. I'm saying that which we when we value one thing over another, because you're always valuing one thing over another, that is the subjective part. That not that there is some value to you, but that valuing this value over that value is going to be the subjective part.
I think the whole point is that
I
the
love you,
subjective
Tom.
part is the fact that you are valuing, right? The objective part is working out why and what you value,
But you're saying
right?
just because it's rational, that makes it objective.
I'm saying that, well, somewhat. I think that when it comes to the point of absolute particularity, you'll get what's called accidents. So if there's no way that you could categorize and form groups and understand it in a way which would make you allow you to use generalizations, then you shouldn't be doing ethics at all. You should just be a hedonist and walk through life doing however you feel, because you're not going to gain any knowledge of it. Because if it's that particular and it's
Not if
just
it's
based off
not beneficial to
experience,
society.
but the whole point is when we say it's beneficial to society, it's because we've already presumed that there is an actual good that we can reach. So it's not just a
Well, but
hedonistic self.
but it is a good for society. It's not a
But the only
good for
how do you understand it?
humans, huh?
How do you so what is the good for society?
So society is like when we've constructed jobs, when we've constructed positions, nuclear families, like all of these different things, we are building on top of social constructs and building on top of social constructs and building on top of social constructs to where now we have so many things that are integrated that doing something differently, like lots of people would talk about having polyamorous relationships and the
Yeah, but
detriment that
we're
could be
talking
to
about.
society. But it's not the polyamory in and of itself, it's going to be the way that it affects the institutions that we've built.
But even when we're talking about what affects the institutions, like you would end up boiling down the fact that we engage in these institutions because we're looking for our own good in relation to our own experiences. So what we're talking about is the collective good weighed against the individual good. But the whole point is that we are engaging in these institutions. Like if you absolutely reject the institutions, you've lost all the value that these institutions bring in relation to self-categorization, in relation to it actually having an impact and helping you understand yourself in a way
But
which is universal.
okay,
If you accept them blindly and you don't rationalize them, you do the same thing. You basically alienate yourself from them, where you say where you say this institution will tell me how to feel and whether this is a good life or not. And so it doesn't contain your reason. And so you're never actually a member of the institution. So like this is why, like, don't get me wrong, I think that this is the balance. I think you've basically clocked onto the balance between what it means to live a human life, which is being a member of a collective. But that and you're right to say that the particular value you experience is valuable. But the point is that if you go entirely one side on that and you go, it's only the particularity of the experience that is valuable, you lose so much of that experience and you lose so much of the value that or the knowledge of the value you needed in order for you to even best express that particularity. Does that make sense?
I kind of, because if other societies are existing with very different institutions and very different values, yet seem to be fine all the same, is one society actually achieving the objective good while the others are lost and just like behind in their evolution to get to where
Yeah,
the
I
other
mean, I
one
think there
is
is
that's actually achieving
100%.
it?
100%. I think that there are societies which are more or less rational. So, for example, I think China is barbaric for the way that it treats its individuals because it basically makes them slaves to the state. And as that, it's irrational. Where I'd say, like, participating in those institutions, you aren't a member and making your own willful participation because you can't actually will for like actually acknowledge whether it is good or bad. Your reason is alienated. So you can't be recognized. You aren't part of that common good. It's the good of a party which are separate from the members. It's
But
abstract. It's a
what if
just a
they're valuing
random
like
category.
what if they're valuing like get efficiency, right? They value efficiency, and that is like the main thing that they're trying to get at is having an efficient society. And so
But why?
being
But the only way that they're going to be able to ground that is in the lives of the people that are living, right? Like that's the whole point. Otherwise, they're going to have to go like it's efficiency for efficiency's
sure,
sake, and it becomes
but
a
yes,
tautology.
but they can value it. So like saying you know having trans people is very confusing to a lot of people. It can cause a lot of strife in like bathrooms and like, WNBA games and all sorts of crap, right? It could be just a lot more efficient to just be like, you know what, let's just not have trans people so that all of these other people aren't put off so much and it doesn't cause so much distress from others and it's not
Yeah,
causing this like split
but
within society where everybody's fighting over this niche this niche subject where like other people are going to be like, well, we want to try to value the individual over the overall cohesiveness of the society, and
I
so
think
we're
that
making
that's a
those
mistake
judgment
though.
calls.
Like you can't just basically what you're talking about is essentially like drywall and or like what is it like basically like paper mache over a fucking pothole. Like that's what you're talking about doing. The problem's still there. The issue is an issue of reason. Why do these people not cohere in society? What is the what need and psychological aspect of themselves is being neglected? That's not going away. In the same way that um, and the society itself might be missing out something integral to itself, even in terms of the majority, which it might not be aware of, which is manifesting in these trans people, but might be indicative to all of humanity or to all of the people in the community. So it's one of those things where you can't just gloss over it without engaging it because for the sake of efficiency, because it's not efficient, it's inefficient, it becomes irrational. That's the whole point of like you have to include the reasoning of all the members and the experiences of all the members in the universal category for the universal category to make sense. And
Do
this is why basically,
you have to believe that like all war is wrong then, right?
oh yeah, I think all war is wrong. I think there can be just wars in the sense that, if it's a defensive war and you're trying to maintain your community and stuff like that, but war itself should be resolved. I think most civilized human beings would say that war is wrong. War's hell, right? Like,
Sure. I don't know. Like I just when I'm talking about like how we value our communities, I think of like Genghis Khan going through and just ravaging tons of other communities and
Genghis Khan.
the
I think Genghis Khan, even for his time, was a bit of a cunt. I think
yeah,
that like
sure,
that's
sure,
the
but him and his people were happy, they were prospering, they were doing really well because they were ravaging everybody else.
that's I don't think that's even the case. I think that a lot of what was like, for example, like a lot of people like to point out these tyrannies and they say like, oh, they were doing well whilst other people suffered. It's like one, like what Hegel points out is that basically the master and the master slave relationship is just assuming they are getting what they want or the best possible relationship to themselves. They aren't actually dealing with the sort of epistemological that they're sort of again like kind of glossing over that benefit or that like expression of negativity, like that doing something which might essentially come back to haunt them or might already be plaguing them and they mightn't be aware of it. Like they are, when they act irrationally, if they do benefit, it's an accident because it's irrational. It's like spinning a roulette table. And there's points, and I
I
think
don't
this
think
is
it
where
is irrational
philosophy,
though. If I can kill the guy next to me and take all of his stuff, that seems insanely rational to me. I'm much better off for it.
I don't think you are. I think that in terms of like
Well,
the
what if I was?
psychology,
Let's say I am. Let's just for the
like,
hypothetical. Let's
like
say I am.
like hypothetic, one, I don't think you could have knowledge of it. As I said, like if it is, it's like spinning a roulette table. But two, even if you like, you can't just in a sort of ethical hypothesis go, let's just assume that the conclusion that I want to be the case is the case.
Well,
Right? Do you
no,
know what I mean?
no, you
Like,
can,
what
because that's
reason do
no,
you
no,
have
no,
to
no, no, no,
believe that it
because
would be better off?
that is kind of
What do
like
you
the
mean
point
by
in
better
a
off?
hypothetical. Like I'm in a cave with somebody, we're both, starving, and one of us has to kill the other in order for one of us to survive. Otherwise, both of us are going to die. Right now,
Yes. Yeah, but that's
one of
different.
us have
That's
to
different.
kill the other. But you say it's different,
That's
but you're
different.
also
No,
saying
no,
that there's like this
the
objective
difference.
good in this
Yeah.
decision as to whether or not I kill him or he kills me. And so now the objective good changes based on the scenario, right?
No, there's a big difference in saying in a situation which is a tragedy, there's two people, neither side can there's no such thing as a common good in this scenario because both people are either going, like one person is definitely going to be eliminated, which means all possibility of their good is going to be eliminated, which means all ethics has formed into essentially this absolutely incapably like irrational point where there is no ethics anymore. It's a breakdown, it's a tragedy. Yeah, that happens, but that's different to like, let's just assume I would live the good life by murdering my neighbor and stealing his shit. Like that's a
Mm-hmm.
really big different scenario.
Well, but yeah, it is, but that's kind of my point is that, like, one, other people have to exist in order for any sort of morals or ethics to exist. And then a society has to exist in order for our type of morals to exist. If a society doesn't exist, it's a very different type of morals that are going to exist. Or if it's a society that is closed off to all other societies and they have no integration, no communication with them, the morals are going to be drastically different as well. And so,
Yeah, but like that to say the morals will be different depending on each society and the circumstances is fine. But there is the point in which, like, the whole point of what you said is that the difference between killing someone and taking their shit and the tragedy scenario is that one has the possibility of developing ethics, which gives them an indication of how they can live a good life, form these structures, these categories, understand themselves in a way which is not just subjective. And the other is I'm going to egoistically murder you for my own gain based upon presumed goods. Like that's a big difference. Like one is no, like I can't have a consideration of what is good, or my consideration of what is good is tied to my society. That's fair enough. Or consideration of science or mathematics is all socially imbued, right? Like like the reason like that many cultures didn't have the decimal system and the decimal system or whatever until the Hindus culturally invented it and then promulgated it like through the Persian Empire, and then you've got essentially modern mathematics, which was shared amongst the world. But modern mathematics is objective. Like the way that maths works is logical, objective. The decimal system makes sense. It's not something that only the Indian, like the Hindus, and that would work out. It's something that they worked out and it made sense to all of us and we all acclimated it for a reason. In the same way as that ethical structures can be promulgated, understood, and embraced through reason universally.
yeah, I even disagree with you on the math point. So I, I
Like,
think there's
are
like
you a mathematical anti-realist or something? Like,
yeah.
I think it would just hit the point of just being like, I don't know if it's totally arbitrary. I don't know why we would even bother. I don't. 1 + 1 = 3, and I think that's where we can end the conversation. But
It's not that it's three. It's that we're just like we're again, it's a the way that our brains work, that we're choosing to categorize and measure things, and not that there's like the objective real thing that's there, but just how we categorize it to measure it, and then we're measuring something that is real. But even for us to say we're measuring something that's real, that something has to be categorized as its own thing that's not objectively its own thing, but we choose to categorize it as such so that we can measure it. And so, like, yeah, it's just it's all, yeah, just the way that we're categorizing from the get-go.
I think there's something to be said. Like I will like I think what there's a difference, right, between saying math is subjective based upon something which we've maybe just sort of arbitrarily chosen to, and I have to go in a second because I told someone else I would have a conversation with them. But
Okay.
the saying that math is subjective because of certain sort of foundational axioms which are the result of a sort of maybe unprovable incompleteness, right? If you affirm like Gödel's incompleteness theorem, right? Like where it's like you have to make an assumption to get there, right? Now,
Yeah.
the point of the mathematical truths might be that there is this assumption in which you have to make to get there, but that doesn't mean that the assumption cannot change and that the assumption cannot be rationally understood in relation to the system to the point in which you iron out in relation to an objective logic whether that assumption was correct or incorrect, which is why we get developments in terms of Euclidean geometry and non-Euclidean geometry in terms of varying types of mathematical theorems which have developed over time in order to solve certain problems and understand those problems and be just rationally consistent.
Yeah.
Like that is the
Yes,
but it's been a really
that is what I would say, is that like within the system that we've constructed, these things can be objective within that system.
I would go further than that. I would say the system can be understood in relation to a real logical reality in which we are reasoning against, which is why we will gain incorrect answers in relation to one mathematical system where we have terrible axiomatic presuppositions, and we'll get greater and more beneficial answers to a more complex, to a more well developed mathematical system. And I mean, like, I'm half standing a kind of pragmatist conception of truth. I think that truth ultimately ties to our experiences of the world, that we are trying to gain like positive and negative experiences of trying to gain positive experience and avoid negative ones. And that's absolutely fine because we are subjective agents performing an objective analysis of the world. And as part of that, our subjectivity is part of that, and that's totally fine. But I've really enjoyed the conversation, man, and thank you for getting Destiny to talk. I think at the start I was a bit maybe took a bit slowly, but I think it worked up into a really good conversation. At least I thought it did anyway. I think Destiny's a bit like blasé with the whole veganism abortion thing.
Yeah, it's a little
He's not
weird
too
that
fond of it.
over and over he'll just kind of, yeah, whatever, at once he gets to a point that he can't explain, and that's kind of annoying.
Yeah.
It's like he'll just be
It
like,
is-
oh
it
yeah,
is
sure,
annoying.
like I'm I'm begging the question, okay, fine, like, and then
I
that's
guess
it.
that's just
It's
what
like,
I'm doing. Yeah,
you
it's
gotta
disengage.
stop doing that, man.
Yeah, but it's just like I don't know. That's why I said like, why are you doing these discussions on abortion, on veganism? If like when it's what that's why I basically said I think it just gets to the point when he's like, I can't answer that. Whatever, I don't give a fuck. And you know what? Like, I think we still got a good conversation out of it. So I do thank you a lot for that, and I really appreciate the opportunity. But yeah, just like if you ever want to chat again, just hit us up, man. It's been really fun.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. Have a good one.
Have a good one, mate.
Later.